Chapter 612. Mo Jingshin walked past Xiaoba. Xiaoba stood stiffly in front of the door, not daring to move. She held a drink in her hand, afraid that she would accidentally spill it on Boss Missouri. She thought that Boss Missouri was going to ignore her and walk away, but the tall man suddenly stopped in front of her. Xiaoba's heart jumped. She recalled what happened in Jin Wan's room earlier and immediately chuckled in embarrassment. So, Mo Jingshin glanced at her. Autumn has arrived in Jing City. The autumn wind is cold at night. Don't let her be exposed to the wind. Check her temperature at night to prevent her from having a recurring fever. And then, okay, I understand. To ease the awkwardness in the room, Xiaoba immediately nodded vigorously. CEO Mo, don't worry. I'll definitely take good care of our boss in Wan. She thought that Mo Jingshin would leave after saying this, but the man only put one hand in his trouser pocket. After a moment of silence, he asked, how did she get through the most difficult time in the past 3 years in London? Did no one help her? Mo Jingshin indeed did not investigate Jin Wan's past 3 years. He arranged for someone he could trust to take her away and give her enough space to grow. Although he knew that growing up would inevitably be a lot of hardships, and it would not be easy for her to achieve anything, he really did not investigate it. In fact, to him, it was just a matter of a few words. But he was afraid that he would not be able to bear to see her suffer and would rather not ask about anything. He knew that her life was not as glorious as it seemed on the surface, and she must have suffered a lot. In his understanding, these were all processes that could forge Jin Wan's strong shell even harder. This was a path that she had to go through. Xiaoba faltered for a moment. There were some words that she did not know whether she should say or not. After thinking for a moment, she said, actually, it's not a big deal. The period before Boss went to England was the most difficult for her, wasn't it? She even got through the most painful period. What else can't she get through? Mo Jingshin glanced at Xiaoba. Xiaoba shifted her eyes away in fear. She did not have the courage to meet CEO Mo's gaze. After all, in her words just now, there was a hint of resentment towards him. However, she was an outsider and was in no position to say much. In fact, she was also wondering if she had said too much just now. After a long time, she whispered again. In the first year when Boss went to England, everything was fine because of Mr. Zan's help. But in the second year, when Mr. Zan suddenly stopped caring, she was met with jealousy and attacks from some companies. For more than half a year, Boss was so poor that she had to calculate how to spend even £50. All the liquid funds in the company were in a stagnant state. They couldn't be taken out, nor could they be used in any way. In short, it was quite difficult. Speaking of this, Xiaoba smiled again. But Boss was also very amazing. She didn't give up even when it was so difficult. At that time, Mr. Vince flew to London and wanted to help her, but she refused. So, all Mr. Vince has been doing is introducing some foreign business to her, helping her promote some interpersonal relationships in the business world, and acting as a bridge between them. She endured everything else by herself. She worked day and night, and even sold the house she bought when she first went to London. She squeezed into a small apartment that was not much better than a basement, eating instant noodles or cheap toast every day. In fact, the most difficult time wasn't too long. Boss wasn't completely without friends. She had many good relationships in London. Even if she didn't accept help from others, there were still people who admired her and would secretly help her with the company. Later, a project of the company was suddenly signed, and they received tens of millions of new financing. The company gradually began to step on the right track, and the performance kept rising. Life also became better. There were indeed difficult times, but as Boss said, those hardships were not worth mentioning compared to all the gains later. There was no need to talk about it often, so there were many things that I almost forgot. I only remember that Boss was very strong. Really, even if she wasn't a special woman, at least she was a woman that I admired. CEO Mo. If you really want to know the most difficult time for Boss, in my opinion, it shouldn't be when she was short of money, but when she just went to the UK. At that time, Boss seemed to be very confused. Every day when she woke up, she would look out of the window from time to time, or suddenly run over to open the door when she heard something. I knew that since she signed the divorce papers and went abroad, she must have let go of it. It was impossible for her to wait for someone. Maybe she didn't even know what she was doing. She just stared blankly at the empty door from time to time. This situation lasted for about 3 months until there were too many things in the company and she got busier and busier. So, no matter what choice boss makes, I think I will understand her and even respect her, because it's not that she hasn't fought for something or denied or refused something. But after 3 years, even I've gotten used to her temper. Even if she's a little sharp now, I still think she's right. I'm just blindly and unreasonably supporting boss. CEO MO, do you understand what I mean? It wasn't until Mo Jingshin's figure disappeared that Xiao Ba came out of her impassioned speech. She stood in front of the door in a daze for a long time before she realized that she had said too much. Boss clearly hated it when she talked about herself with others. Xiao Ba immediately lowered her face, walked up to Jin Wan's door, and knocked on it. The weather in Jing City was indeed cold. After all, it was the end of September. Jin Wan got up at 7 o'clock, took a shower, and walked out of the room at 8 o'clock. When she came out, she wore a long, dark gray windbreaker. It was not particularly thick and was suitable for this early autumn weather. The marks on her neck could not disappear so quickly. When she took a shower in the morning, she could still see the marks at a glance, so she had to wrap a scarf around her neck. When she closed the door, she carried her suitcase in one hand and sunglasses in the other, completely dressed for the airport. Xiao Ba had already woken up. When she woke up, she suddenly received a call from the front desk and went downstairs to bring up 2 sets of breakfast. Chapter 613. Jinwan paused and looked at the things in Xiao Ba's hands. Mo Jingshin asked someone to send them here. Yes, it's the assistant named Xiao Hu. He said that these are the breakfast CEO Mo ordered and asked him to send them here. He also said that CEO Mo told you to have a good breakfast before you leave. Don't starve because you're in a hurry. Jinwan glanced at the breakfast and said lightly, "Which one do you want to eat? I'm fine with anything. These are clearly your favorites. When you were in England, you craved these Chinese breakfasts several times, but you couldn't find the authentic ones. The Chinese food made by those foreigners was worse than the other. I didn't expect that CEO Mo even knew your favorite breakfast and bought them all," Xiao Ba said and looked at Jin Wan with bright eyes. "In fact, there's nothing urgent in High City. Would you like to stay in Beijing for a few more days before going back? President Mo really cares a lot about you. Haven't the plane tickets been booked? You can return them. There's no need to return. Let's go back. I happen to have something I need to check out." "All right." Xiao Ba handed the breakfast to her. "Let's have breakfast before leaving. Don't waste CEO Mo's kindness." Jin Wan took another look at the breakfast, turned, and went straight into Xiao Ba's room, intending to finish it here. Xiao Ba eagerly opened the lid of the dumplings and handed the cutlery to her. Then, while eating her toast and milk, she said vaguely, "Boss, when CEO Mo came out of your room last night, I saw him." Jin Wan paused with the spoon in her hand. Without speaking, she lowered her head and took a bite of the small wonton. "Then when I went to your room again, I saw that your mouth was a little swollen," Xiao Ba said and shrank her neck as if afraid that Jin Wan would hit her. But Jin Wan just ate quietly and ignored her. Xiao Ba glanced at her a few more times. She couldn't help but put down the things in her hands and whispered, "It's not that I want to talk too much, but I really can't help but ask. You and CEO Mo went on a business trip together, and he was still in your room so late at night. Although he left later, it's clear that the relationship between the two of you is no longer as simple as strangers after the divorce. Also, CEO Mo treats you really well, although I don't understand why he chose to divorce you in the first place." After a pause, Xiao Ba continued, "So, boss, what's your relationship with President Mo now?" Jin Wan blew at the hot soup in the bowl, took a sip, and said unhurriedly, "Even now, I don't know what the relationship is. Maybe when I return to High City and find out the truth, I'll know." Xiao Ba was a little confused, but seeing that Jin Wan didn't want to talk about these things at all, she had to continue to eat the toast obediently. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon that day, Jin Wan and Xiao Ba landed in High City. After returning to High City, the two of them rushed to the company. Jin Wan didn't idle for a moment. She solved some other things in the company that were delayed because of her absence and worked overtime overnight. It wasn't until the next morning that she had almost finished. Xiaoba had long been used to Jin Wan's working frequency. Every time she came back from a business trip for a few days, she would rush to deal with the urgent things at hand first, and only think of resting after finishing them. The next morning, Jin Wan closed her eyes in the office for a short rest, and Xiaoba had been busy since last night. In the afternoon, Xiaoba pushed the door open and came in. Seeing that Jin Wan was still taking a nap on the chair behind the desk, she didn't say anything but brought in Jin Wan's oversized suitcase. She opened it and wanted to help her sort it out and take out some office documents that were to be placed in the company. However, when she opened it and flipped through it, she saw a scroll on the side. She couldn't help but be surprised. Since it was in Jin Wan's suitcase and had been specially brought back to High City, it must be a famous painting. She didn't dare to touch it, but found some office documents and was about to get up. "Help me bring that painting over." Suddenly, Jin Wan, who had been sitting behind the desk with her eyes closed, said softly. Xiaoba turned to see that Jin Wan still hadn't opened her eyes, but it was clear that she had been awake when she came in. When she carefully picked up the painting and put it on the desk, Jin Wan opened her eyes, took a look at it, and asked indifferently, "Is there anything else I need to deal with these 2 days?" "No. Recently, all the projects in the company have been carried out in an orderly manner. There's nothing important. Besides, you often travel on business, and many things have been done by the vice president for you. There are just some documents that need your signature and decision-making. Now that you have signed them, there's nothing else." Xiaoba continued to help her pack her suitcase. At the same time, he said, "Actually, boss, you can take advantage of the fact that you're not too busy now and take a good rest for a month or two. The new projects you signed in Jing City have already been communicated between the companies. The people below will be able to handle it. You don't have to do it yourself all the time." Jin Wan didn't speak. It was true that she hadn't taken a vacation for a long time. Jin Wan was still thinking about when to go back to the Ji family and hang the painting back in the study of the Ji family. Perhaps because of the father-daughter relationship between her and Ji Hongwon for many years. Ji Hongwon called her before it was time to get off work, saying that he knew she had come back from Jing City and asked her to go back to the Ji family for dinner in the evening. He specially asked Annie Chin to cook a lot of her favorite dishes for her. There was no time like the present, so Jin Wan directly agreed. At about 5 o'clock in the evening, Jin Wan drove back to the Ji family. These years, she didn't have much contact with her family. After returning to China, she only came back to have dinner with her father occasionally. She didn't intend to ask about her life experience and didn't feel anything in her heart. When she entered the door with the painting, Ji Hongwon glanced at the painting in her hand. "What is it? It's not a festival. Why did you bring back a painting when you came back to have dinner with me? Where did you get this painting from? Do you want me to appraise it for you?" "I saw a painting in an auction in Jing City. I thought you would like it, so I brought it back." Jin Wan said simply but didn't rush to open the painting. "After dinner, I'll hang the painting in the study. You'll know it then." Seeing her meaningful look, Ji Hongwon stared at the painting in her hand for a long time, thought about it, didn't say much, and ordered someone to prepare dinner. Chapter 614. What partner? Back then, your Annie Shun took advantage of the fact that I was drunk and had sex with me. Later, I also thought the same as you. I needed someone by my side, so I married her. In the end, look at what happened. Ji Hongwon poured wine into his glass and said, "A few days ago, when you were not here, Shin Haru came back to make a scene several times. She said that after working hard for the Ji family for so many years, she was driven out without taking a penny with her. She even said that she would file a lawsuit. If the Ji family doesn't give her hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, she won't give up." Jin Wan's face turned cold. "With the slow-acting poison she gave you, I can send the drug test records to the court. It'll be enough to make her suffer. How dare she file a lawsuit? Doesn't Sheng Yihan care about her now? I don't know. The power of the Sheng family is in Sheng Yihan's hands. Although he hasn't severed his mother-son relationship with your Annie Shan, he doesn't care about family affection. He probably doesn't communicate much with his son. Shun Haru is clearly living a good life now, but she still comes to the Ji family to make trouble. She kept clamoring to see me and talk to me face to face. I ignored her and asked the security guards to drive her away. Speaking of this, Ji Hongwon let out a long sigh. I don't know why I brought such a woman into the family. How great is it now? When I miss the kids, I just need to give you a call, and you can come back. When I want to be free, no one can control me, and I can drink whenever I want. In the past, I didn't even dare to put my arms around a woman's waist when I went out to socialize. Now, at least my life in the middle and late years is more comfortable. Jean Won pursed her lips, but then she thought that Ji Hongwon was only in his 50s. It was normal for him to live a better life. Even if there weren't many people in the Ji family, she still had to live a better life. Besides, Ji Hongwon was the pillar of the Ji Corporation. She had so many social engagements now, not to mention an old fox in the business circle like him. His life outside was probably much better than hers. Every day, she worried that Ji Hongwon would be lonely at home. Now that she thought about it, she really thought too much. He helped raise someone else's daughter for so many years without any regrets. He couldn't live so hard all the time. He should enjoy life. After dinner, Jean Won went straight to the study. When he hung Zhang Daqian's peach blossom painting back to its original position, he stood in front of the painting and looked at it for a long time until the door to the study opened and Ji Hongwon walked in. When he saw the painting, his eyes paused for a moment before he suddenly turned back to look at it again. "This is the painting you brought back from Jing City?" Ji Hongwon asked as he walked over. His eyes were fixed on the painting. Clearly, he was more touched than Jean Won. "Yes, after all, I saw it at home when I was young. At that time, my mother often carried me back and forth in your study. This is the painting that left the deepest impression on me. When I saw it in Beijing, I wanted to take it back and hang it here. I reluctantly let go of this painting in the past, and I've regretted it for many years. I didn't expect to be able to hang it here in my lifetime." Ji Hongwon looked at it for a while, then smiled and said, "Girl, this thing isn't cheap now, is it?" "Not bad," Jean Won said meaningfully. Anyway, she didn't pay for this painting. Seeing that Ji Hongwon had been looking at the paintings, she guessed that he had something on his mind because of these paintings. She stayed in the study for a while, and then went out. She didn't plan to stay at the Ji family tonight, and wanted to go back to Yuehu Bay to rest for a few days. Before leaving, Jean Won chatted with Annie Chin in the living room downstairs for a while. When she was about to leave, Ji Hongwon came downstairs. Seeing Jean Won hadn't left, he said in a low voice, "Won, come up. Dad wants to talk to you about something." Jean Won paused and looked up at him. Ji Hongwon turned around and went up first. Vaguely, Jean Won felt that what Ji Hongwon was going to talk to her about was not a trivial matter, so she thought about it and followed him upstairs. When she returned to the study, Ji Hongwon saw that she had closed the door, looked back at her, and said, "In fact, you have always wanted to know about your mother, but because I never mentioned it, you never mentioned it. But today, seeing this painting you brought back, I realized that although you were very young when your mother left, it doesn't mean that you don't care about the relationship between mother and daughter, and it doesn't mean that you really don't want to know where your roots are." Jean Won looked at him calmly. "Dad, it's true that this painting reminds me of my childhood, so I want to hang it in the original place. I don't have any other thoughts." "Really?" Ji Hongwon looked at her, smiled meaningfully, and sighed with a smile. "I don't want to mention your family background. After all, it's not a happy past for me, your mother, and that person, and there are too many grudges between us. I don't want to mention it. Do you really want to be kept in the dark for the rest of your life? If this is your choice, of course, I won't say more, and I don't want to say more." Jean Won didn't speak again. Ji Hongwon understood her silence and sighed. "During this period of time, I've also heard some news. You've had some dealings with the Xiao family. With your acuity, I'm sure you'll be able to detect some things, even if I don't say it. There was something that seemed to be hidden under such a thin layer of paper." Jean Won looked calm, but in her heart, countless waves were surging. "The Xiao family. I really didn't want to mention it, but I think the Xiao family doesn't want to keep you outside after knowing the truth. Since some things can't be hidden, I might as well tell you from the beginning to the end," Ji Hongwon said, and put a piece of paper with an address on the table. "Go back and have a look at this place when you have time." Jean Won looked at the address on the paper, and her eyes couldn't help but deepen. After leaving the Ji family, Jinwan went straight back to Yuehubei. Her hair had grown a lot longer recently, and it was now more than 10 centimeters below her shoulders. After showering, she walked out of the bathroom while drying her hair. She glanced at the phone on the coffee table and the note with the address written on it. After drying her hair, she put down the hairdryer, sat on the sofa, picked up the note, and read it for a while. Thinking that she really had nothing to do recently, she thought it would be good to go to this place during her vacation. She picked up her cell phone and was about to send a message to the company to explain something and say that she was going to take a few days off. However, when she opened WeChat, she saw that Mo Jingshan's profile picture was still in the row of messages. The last message was from that night, when he asked her what flavor of noodles she wanted to eat, and she said anything. The man's WeChat profile picture was still her photo, and his name was still blank. He didn't even post a message on WeChat Moments. Chapter 615. G City. The next day, Jinwan arrived here. Because this was the city her grandmother lived in, Jinwan wasn't familiar with her grandmother. She only vaguely remembered that when she was young, her grandmother brought her other daughters and children to stay in High City for a few days during the spring festival. Back then, she was still young and didn't know what happened. She only remembered that they parted on bad terms, and her mother was in a particularly bad mood at that time. The reason why Ji Hongwen asked her to come to G City to visit her grandmother, whom she hadn't contacted for many years, was because her grandmother suddenly had a cerebral hemorrhage 2 months ago and almost died. Thankfully, she was sent to the hospital in time and met a professional doctor who saved her from the gates of hell. Now, she was recuperating at home, but she wasn't as healthy as before. Right now, she had to go out in a wheelchair every day or lay in bed. Ji Hongwen said that her grandmother was already in her 70s. Although a cerebral hemorrhage didn't take her life, she probably wouldn't live for long. 2 months ago, they had called the Ji family to say that they wanted to visit Jinwan and Ji Mengran. They had only seen them a few times in their lives and were afraid that they wouldn't even be able to see them for the last time. However, Ji Mengran completely ignored these so-called poor relatives. She couldn't even be bothered to return to the Ji family. Why would she come to a small place like G City to visit her dying grandmother? G City was indeed very small. There was no airport. She had to transfer from the airport to take a train to get here. As soon as she stepped out of the train station, she found that there were always gazes on her. At first, she thought that her 2 suitcases were too large and attracted the attention of passers-by. However, when she took a taxi, the driver explained to her, "Little beauty, you're dressed quite well. I can tell it's not cheap just by looking at it. Aren't you afraid of being robbed in such a remote place?" Jinwan was dressed in a low-key manner. She knew that G City was a small city, and it would take a long drive to get to her grandmother's house. It was a remote place, so she only wore casual clothes. She didn't even have any brands on her, nor did she bring any jewelry. The only things in these 2 suitcases were the small gifts she had bought at the airport before boarding the plane. She planned to give them when she met her grandmother and the rest of her family. Even such a simple gift could tell that it wasn't cheap. Was there something wrong with her clothes? Or did she not look like someone who had lived in this city? After nearly 2 hours of rushing, Jinwan finally arrived at her so-called grandmother's home. Just as she was about to knock, the door in front of her opened. "Oh, there are beautiful clothes everywhere. Why do you have to wear this one? If you like it, ask Mom to buy you another one." "Mine won't, huh? Who are you?" A girl dressed fashionably in this city looked at Jinwan in surprise, who was carrying 2 large suitcases. She stared at Jinwan's face in astonishment and looked back at her younger sister, who came out behind her. The 2 girls stood in front of the door and stared at Jinwan at the same time as if they had seen something rare. "Damn, she looks just like the woman in the photo. I mean, she looks just like that dead ant." Jinwan, hearing this, she guessed that the 2 in front of her should be the 2 children of her grandmother's other daughter. In other words, they were her cousins. Before coming here, Jinwan had inquired about her grandmother's situation. She had asked Ji Hongwen, Annie Chin, and some of the old servants in the Ji family. She knew that her mother's family was poor when she was young. She was born in a small city like G City and had to rely on scholarships and recommendation to go to college in the United States. It was the various people and things she met after arriving in the United States that changed her life. Her mother married into a wealthy family like the G family, which was equivalent to flying up the branch. However, Jinwon didn't know why she didn't contact her family. Jinwon didn't know. She only learned from Annie Chin that her mother's relationship with her family wasn't particularly good. Her mother's older sister was especially arrogant and domineering. She heard that when they visited the G family, they were directly chased out. After so many years, they didn't contact each other again. The two of you are always bickering and fighting over a new dress. You're already in your 20s. Do you think your little girl's fighting over sweets or something? A woman's dissatisfied voice came from the door. After a while, a woman who appeared to be in her 50s walked out. When she saw Jinwon, she looked her up and down strangely. She stared at her face for a moment and then looked at her clothes. She seemed to have recalled something, but her tone was unfamiliar and rude. You're from High City's G family? Jinwon nodded. Hello. The woman in her 50s raised her brows. Are you Ji Mingran or Jinwon? Jinwon. Wow. Before the middle-aged woman could speak, the two girls suddenly surrounded her. Cousin, hello. I'm Song Cece, and this is my younger sister, Song Kiki. I've long heard grandmother mention you. Are you really from High City? Aren't there many tall buildings in High City? I heard that trains can even travel in the sky. Jinwon, she really wanted to say that it wasn't trains in the sky, but light rail. It was only on the flyovers and higher tracks in High City. However, Jinwon looked at these two cousins who were not much younger than her, but appeared so innocent. She did not say much and only smiled and greeted them. The two little cousins first pulled Jinwon into the door and then helped to carry the suitcase in Jinwon's hand. Anyway, the suitcase was full of gifts for them, so Jinwon just let them take it. When she turned to look at the middle-aged woman inside, the woman just glanced at her indifferently and then called back, "Old lady, Jinwon is here." Then she saw an old woman in her 70s or 80s come out of the door in a wheelchair. She looked surprised, and then the middle-aged woman next to her complained, "Why didn't you tell me in advance that you were coming back? Are you Won? The old woman looked at Jinwon with emotion. Jinwon smiled and nodded. "Hello, are you grandmother?" The old woman nodded. Jinwon did not say more. Anyway, she had already called him grandmother. She heard that their relationship with her mother was not particularly good, so there was no need for her to be too friendly. If Ji Hongwon hadn't specifically said that she might not even be able to see her for the last time, she might not have come to G City. However, since she was already here, she might as well take things as they came. Anyway, it was a rare vacation, so there was nothing wrong with coming to this kind of small town to experience life. At this time, the middle-aged woman and the old woman exchanged a few more words. After chatting for a while, Jinwon was invited into the door, but it was mostly polite greetings. Jinwon did not think that there would be any touching family waiting for her here. Chapter 616. Mom, my sister can easily buy a new dress when she goes shopping. I haven't bought any clothes for 2 months. Give me 200 yuan. I want to buy some too. Song Kiki acted as though she did not see Jinwon enter and suddenly spoke up after everyone entered the room. Jinwon's eyes lit up. You guys chat. I'll put the luggage down first. Jinwon looked around and saw that the house was quite large. There were also quite a number of rooms. She asked, "Where's my mother's room?" Her grandmother glanced at her and did not speak. The middle-aged woman's expression also faltered. Song Cece and Song Kiki's expressions suddenly appeared nervous. There's no rush. It's just 2 suitcases. How many things can there be? Let's put them down first. This house is a little messy. Your mother's room has been empty for so many years. It's quite dirty inside. Cece, Kiki, help tidy it up before letting Jinwon move in. Can't we tidy it up any time? Song Cece stepped forward and held on to Jinwon's arm affectionately. Cousin, this is your first time back. Did you bring any gifts for us? Usually, Song Cece would not casually call someone older sister. However, she had heard that Jinwon came from a very wealthy place, and that her family was also very wealthy. Even though she did not know of her current situation, she was certain that she was still a wealthy person. Thus, she approached to curry favor with her. Jinwan noticed that their gazes had shifted to the innermost room. She guessed that it was most likely that room. However, she pretended that nothing was out of the ordinary. She pointed to the suitcases they had thrown on the ground with a smile. Yes, this pink suitcase is filled with gifts. Open it up and divide it among yourselves. As she spoke, she picked up a silver suitcase filled with her own things and turned to enter that room. The moment her two cousins heard that there was a gift, they did not stop her. Her grandmother and the middle-aged woman did not have time to stop her. Jinwan stepped forward to open the door. She saw that although the bedsheets and wardrobe looked brand new, the floor and bed looked like a junkyard. The floor was covered with snacks and empty beverage bottles, as well as sunflower seed shells. The originally clean blanket on the bed had been dragged to the floor and was covered with dust. Several drawers were open, revealing the things and photos her mother used when she was young. There were even some fruit juices and other things spilled on them. As it was still hot in G-City during the day, there were actually flies flying around her mother's yellowed photos. There were some old clothes in the wardrobe. They appeared to have been worn by her mother decades ago. Although they were not thrown away, they were wrinkled and not very clean. It was clear that someone had taken them out, dirted them, and then stuffed them into the wardrobe. Jinwan watched this scene. When she turned back, she saw that Song Cece and Song Kiki were still excitedly studying the password on the suitcase. After a long time, they could not open it. Her grandmother's gaze was slightly embarrassed. The middle-aged woman, who Jinwan should be addressing as aunt, raised her hand to touch her ear. Jinwan immediately noticed the pair of gold earrings on her ears. It seemed like she had worn them for a long time. She remembered that when they visited the Ji family when they were young, they seemed to have taken away a lot of things from her mother's room. Back then, Jinwan was still young and had stood by the side to watch. She did not know what they were doing. She only heard her aunt say as she tried on her mother's jewelry, "Rich madams from wealthy families are really different. Everything in the jewelry box is not cheap. Those diamonds and pearls aren't even worth their value. These gold and silver jewelry can still be worth some money." The so-called aunt could tell what Jinwan was thinking. She pointed to the room and said, "Hey, Cece and Kiki usually don't stay here. However, whenever the two sisters quarrel, they don't stay together. Every time Kiki is born, she would run over to her aunt's room to stay. That's why I changed the wardrobe in bed, but your mother's things are still inside. We haven't touched them." Hearing this, Song Kiki turned to see that Jinwan's expression was not right. She rushed to stand up. "Cousin, I'll clean it up in a while. I promise I'll clean it up. Is there no other room in the house? Can't I stay in another room when I'm angry?" Jinwan asked expressionlessly. The other rooms are all hard beds. It's not comfortable to stay in. Furthermore, the heater isn't good when the weather is cold. Annie's room has the best heater." Song Kiki pouted. "Cousin, I don't have any other place to sleep. Don't be so petty." The problem was that Jinwan came here for her mother. What should she think when she saw such a scene? Could it be that she couldn't stay in her mother's room? "Cousin, don't be angry. I'll pack up my things right now." Song Kiki leaned forward again. However, even after saying this twice, she did not seem to have any intention of packing up. Instead, she tugged on Jinwan's arm to ask, "Cousin, why can't you unlock the password for your luggage?" Jinwan had rushed here from High City. She had traveled by plane, train, and taxi for an entire day. She was tired and could not be bothered to fuss over it. She gave him the 4-digit password and then said, "Forget it. I'll pack up tomorrow. I'll stay in another room today." The moment she finished speaking, her two cousins, grandmother, and big aunt all revealed satisfied expressions. Jinwan carried her luggage and turned to find a room. Song Cece and Song Kiki had already opened up their luggage and cried out in surprise. At this moment, Song Cece suddenly stood up to help Jinwan carry her luggage. She snatched it over and said, "Cousin, you're really rich. Are all these gifts for us? What are you carrying here? The clothes you're wearing are really beautiful. Are there any other beautiful clothes in this silver luggage?" Hearing this, Jinwan quickly took the luggage back. "These are all my personal clothes. There aren't any new clothes. Aren't there many gifts in the pink luggage? You can split them however you like." Seeing that Jinwan seemed to treasure this silver luggage, the two sisters came over. After Jinwan entered the room, they fought to open her luggage. The password for both of Jinwan's luggage was the same. After opening it, the pajamas, skirts, and other casual clothes that she felt comfortable in were all taken out by the two sisters. They looked at them in the mirror and fought to try them on. Jinwan pursed her lips in silence as she watched them try on the clothes. Fine, she couldn't wear these clothes anymore. After the two sisters searched through most of the clothes in her suitcase and left in all kinds of high-end and beautiful clothes, Jinwan was finally able to rest quietly for a while. It was no wonder Song Kiki was unwilling to stay in this room. The windows were all broken. Thankfully, G-City's autumn weather was not too cold. However, it was inevitable that flies and mosquitoes would fly in. Chapter 617. Jing City. Mo Jingshin had just left a meeting when he received a call from Shinmu. CEO, Mo. After returning to High City, Miss G didn't rush to the Civil Affairs Bureau to check her marriage records. For some reason, she suddenly went to G City. Mo Jingshan paused in his steps and glanced at the business partners who were greeting him. He calmly asked, G City? That's right. I've never heard of MN Group having any business dealings with G City. Besides, she went there alone. We don't have anyone there, and the transportation isn't convenient. Right now, I don't know the situation. The only thing I know is that Miss G bought a lot of gifts before boarding the plane. It seems like she has some friends or relatives there. Mo Jingshan paused for several seconds before continuing forward. After a moment of silence, he calmly said, her mother's household registration was in G City. So, is Miss G investigating her own background? But isn't it inappropriate for her to go back alone? Besides, the G family doesn't seem to have much contact with her mother's family. Some so-called relatives who haven't been in contact with each other for years. Once they become suspicious, it's different from the bloodless killings in the business circle. A remote and desolate place produces unruly people. With her current temper, it's indeed inappropriate for her to be alone. Then, should we send someone over? Mo Jingshan glanced out the window of the conference hall and toward the south of G City. He softly and indifferently said, wait for me to return. This bed was not just a little hard. Jinwan originally wanted to rest in her room for the afternoon, but she was too tired from running around. Furthermore, when she recalled that this was where her mother had grown up, she slightly let down her guard and unknowingly fell asleep. It was only when she heard the sounds of tables being moved and the smell of cooking wafting in that she recalled where she was in her dreams. It was most likely dinner time. Jinwan turned over and planned to sleep for a few more minutes. All of a sudden, she felt a small force tugging something out her hands. Jinwan subconsciously tightened her grip, but the other party seemed to be stubbornly trying to tug it out. Jinwan impatiently opened her eyes and was caught off guard to see Song Cece standing by her bedside. She was currently holding onto this year's latest model phone. Unexpectedly, Jinwan, who had been sleeping, suddenly woke up. Song Cece was a little embarrassed. She quickly withdrew her hand and rubbed it on her skirt as if nothing had happened. Jinwan looked down and saw that there were many ugly fingerprints on her phone screen. Before she fell asleep, she was looking at her phone. She fell asleep unknowingly and forgot to put her phone away. Fortunately, she had been holding it in her hand. If she had left it at the side, it would have been taken away by the two sisters. The price did not matter. None of the clothes that the two sisters had taken from her suitcase were cheap. Any of the pajamas cost more than 4 digits. However, there was a lot of information on the phone and computer, as well as the contact list of work contacts. This was the bottom line. Cousin, you're awake? Song Cece purposely asked. Her gaze sneaked several glances at Jinwan's phone. That was the latest model of this year's phone. It seemed to have just been released and was rumored to cost nearly 10,000 yuan. Jinwan calmly stood up, her expression indifferent. Mom and Grandma asked me to wake you up for dinner. All right. Jinwan glanced at the door. It seemed like she had to think of a way to lock the door if she stayed here for the next 2 days. Otherwise, she would not be able to sleep well. Cousin, do you usually sleep in the afternoon? Is it like being a rich young lady in a rich family, where you don't have to do any work and only have to eat, sleep, and buy things every day? I heard that Haichang's Ji family is one of the 4 largest families in Haicheng. They have so much money that they can't even finish spending it. A young lady from such a wealthy family would have at least hundreds of thousands of yuan in pocket money every month, or even more. Cousin, that phone of yours is really nice. It's the latest model, isn't it? You shouldn't have only bought one, right? Did you buy a few more to bring back? Jean Wan adjusted her clothes while listening to Song Cici's barrage of questions. Jean Wan had just woken up and did not have the patience to talk to this little girl, who was clearly in her 20s but pretended to be innocent. However, since these were her mother's last relatives in this world, she patiently and expressionlessly gave a few perfunctory replies and gave a short answer. Outside, her aunt urged her to eat. Jean Wan stood up and ignored her. Cousin, you really didn't buy a few more phones? That phone of yours is already worth 3 to 4 months of someone else's salary. I've only seen it in advertisements. Song Cici dilly-dallied and was unwilling to leave. It was as though she did not want to stop until Jean Wan agreed to give her the phone. After all, if she were to leave, Song Kiki would most likely fight with her for it. Thus, she wanted to make things clear in this room. Seeing that Jean Wan was completely ignoring her, Song Cici chased after her to ask, Cousin, did you buy everything yourself? Do you have a boyfriend? Could the phone have been given to you by your boyfriend? Jean Wan acted as though she did not hear anything. She had already pushed open the door and left. Song Cici immediately pursed her lips unhappily and quickly followed after her. Jean Wan could not be bothered to reply. She continued probing. This Song Cici would definitely think of ways to get information out of her, and even more so, take the phone for herself. These so-called family members of her mother's family had truly not contacted each other for many years. In their minds, Jean Wan was merely the young lady of the Ji family and was still relying on the Ji family to live. Thus, the words that came out of their mouths were all sour, talking about how she was a young lady from a wealthy family. They did not understand anything else about Jean Wan's family. At the dining table, her grandmother's hands trembled the entire time as she ate. However, she was stubborn and refused to let anyone feed her. As a result, her clothes were covered in soup stains. This family was probably used to it and did not say anything. Her aunt placed the last dish on the table. Song Kiki was already seated at the table, waiting for the meal to start. She had already changed into a French brand dress that she had previously taken from Jean Wan. Her expression was filled with delight. Song Cici also followed over. After the family sat down, they began eating with their own thoughts. Only her grandmother would occasionally stare at Jean Wan's face, because she looked too much like her mother when she was young. Jean Wan, you're not young anymore. You should be in your 20s, right? Her aunt sat down and glanced at Jean Wan. Seeing that she was not wearing any jewelry, nor did she have any engagement rings, she immediately raised her brows. Oh, that's right, 24. Here, those who are over 25 and still haven't married are considered old ladies. You're not married yet? Don't you have a man? Chapter 618. Why are you looking at me? Seeing Jean Wan's lukewarm gaze, her aunt could tell that Jean Wan's temper was similar to her mother's. Although she appeared calm on the surface, she actually had a temper in her bones. She immediately snorted. I'm just being concerned. After all, for people like you who come from wealthy families, even if no one really likes you, for the sake of money and marriage, you'll most likely be able to get married. It's just that I don't know what kind of person you'll end up marrying. Speaking up to this point, first Aunt sighed again. I've heard that in the marriages between rich and powerful families, many young ladies are married to old men with big bellies and bald heads. When I think about how you might live such a life in the future, I also feel sorry for your mother. Aunt, you must have watched too many bitter TV dramas. Usually, only these kinds of inferior TV dramas would produce such plots of people hating the rich. The daughters of wealthy families all have miserable marriages, and the descendants of wealthy families never have good endings. After all, such plots are mostly used to satisfy the mentality of ordinary people at the bottom of society. That's why there's no lack of brainwashed directors who produce such things and broadcast them to brainwash people. Jinwan calmly ate, as she calmly said. But in reality, I believe that when Aunt visited the G family many years ago, you should have seen it before. Her aunt's expression immediately froze because of Jinwan's clear praise and hidden criticism. Back then, when they visited the G family, they had naturally seen a true wealthy family. Although it was not as exaggerated as those portrayed in TV dramas, it was truly a wealthy family. The people living in that kind of place, regardless of whether it was money, background, or even character, they could not compare to them. Indeed, there were no rotten old men. At that time, they had also met some of the relatives and friends who interacted with the G family. Those people's children were all well-educated. Aside from some who were spoiled and willful, most of them were well-educated. They were not people ordinary people could compare to. Her aunt held her shoulders, suppressing her anger with a smile. That's true. Marrying a rotten old man is indeed too unrealistic. After all, your looks are still passable. At the very least, you'll be able to marry a rich family's playboy. Jinwan didn't answer. Anyway, no matter what she said, this aunt could find something to comfort her own unbalanced heart. Although this was a small city, fortunately, Jinwan was used to these home-cooked meals. Except for her grandmother, who couldn't eat well because of her health, the tableware was clean. While eating, Jinwan wanted to take away her mother's things as soon as possible and leave as soon as possible. There was no need to stay here for too long. At this moment, her grandmother spoke up. Jinwan, if you're free in the future, come back to G City more often. If you need anything, we can help you. Hearing her grandmother's words, Jinwan just listened. What did she possibly need their help with? First, Aunt suddenly chimed in. Cece and Kiki will be graduating from university in 2 years. By then, they'll definitely need to spend a lot of money to find a job. If you're well off, why don't you leave some money for them this time? Consider it as helping your 2 cousins. Mom, after we graduate, we'll need to change into more presentable clothes and necessities when we find a job or something, Song Cece interjected. That's right, Jinwan. In any case, you don't lack money. The gifts you bought this time shouldn't be cheap. There's no need to be so wasteful. Why don't you just give them cash? Speaking up to here, her aunt paused. It's not much. For your 2 cousins, 100,000 yuan each is enough. Leave us 200,000 before you leave. What do you think? If there's anything we need in the future, we'll call you again. The moment Song Cece and Song Kiki heard 200,000 yuan, their eyes lit up. They exchanged glances and gently pushed each other. The 2 of them joked around for a while, clearly secretly delighted. Her grandmother nodded. That's right. After all, we're the only relatives left in your mother. Your aunt isn't an outsider either. We should help each other out. Jinwan, you've been living in a big city and have seen many people. If you meet any men with good family backgrounds, don't forget to introduce them to Cece and Kiki. The people cousin knows must all be rich people. Song Kiki placed her bowl and chopsticks down. By the way, I didn't dare to touch them earlier. I saw an especially expensive laptop in cousin's luggage. Sister, we'll be lacking a laptop when we're staying at school, right? The moment Song Kiki finished speaking, everyone's gaze focused on Jinwan. Jinwan's gaze was indifferent. She did not meet their gazes at all. She naturally curved her lips and smiled mildly. I came all the way to G City and even brought my laptop with me. There must be something important that I need to do. There's work information inside, and it's all quite important. The moment she heard these words, Song Kiki, who was originally excited that she would agree to it, immediately fell. Her aunt glanced at her again. You have a job? Jinwan also glanced at her. You know that I'm not young anymore. Is it strange to have a job? Not only did she have a job, it was a job worth tens of billions. However, she could not say it here. Otherwise, this family might think of a way to drink her blood. 200,000 yuan? Ha! If her mother did not intend to help this so-called family back then, Jinwan would now understand why her mother was not close to her family. Since her mother had never helped them, there was no way she would satisfy their request of 200,000 yuan, let alone 200,000 yuan. She would not even give them 20,000 yuan. After all, if this matter started, they would ask for money endlessly in the future. Did these people treat her as an ATM? Even if she gave 200,000 yuan to a beggar, they would not stay here. Her aunt wanted to say something, and her two cousins also wanted to say something. However, Jinwan did not respond at all and focused on eating. The atmosphere at the dining table became slightly awkward. Of course, the one feeling awkward was not Jinwan, but the others who clearly wanted to speak but were ignored time and time again. In the end, the meal was tasteless. Jinwan, on the other hand, was full. She stood up and went to her mother's room. She saw that it was still as messy as before. Song Kiki said that she would tidy it up, but in reality, she had no intention of giving up the room. How could she possibly tidy it up? Seeing that Jinwan had entered the room to tidy up and even brought out her mother's yellowed photos, Song Kiki gave Song Cici a look. The two sisters stood up and left. Chapter 619. The two sisters held onto their phones and looked at the report on Jinwan's ranking on Forbes this year. However, they could only see a photo from an interview. The person smiling calmly in the photo did look similar to Jinwan, but the report was written in English. Even the name was the English name Jinwan used when she was in London. They could not understand what was written and could only stare at the photo for a long time. Song Kiki said, "In the afternoon, I didn't know which website I clicked on, but a page suddenly popped up and saw this small photo hanging in the corner. When I clicked on it, I didn't expect it to be such a large report. Do you think the person in this photo is Jinwan?" Song Cici stared at it for a long time. She felt that although the photos looked very similar, any random photo had been photoshopped. It was too bright, and she could only make out about 70 to 80% of their faces. Furthermore, all the beauties looked the same. Perhaps it was just that they looked similar. She pointed to the English words on the photo. "Although I don't know much about the others, you should at least know about London's Forbes ranking, right? Otherwise, she wouldn't have gone to school for so many years." Looking at these words, I think it's an interview with a female entrepreneur in London. Why would a rich young lady like Jinwan run to London instead of enjoying her life in High City? Isn't she always in High City? She said earlier that she has a job, so the person in this photo can't be her. The two's conversation shifted from a photo to Jinwan, and then to the clothes. Finally, they quickly discussed how they would spend the 200,000 yuan. The two were rocking back and forth in laughter when the door opened. Jinwan walked out and looked at the two sisters who had been chatting in the yard. She said calmly and mildly, "The room is ready. Can I change to another room?" "Ah." Song Kiki was stunned. She subconsciously looked towards Song Cici. Song Cici stepped forward. "Cousin, didn't you say you would stay in another room tonight? Why are you suddenly changing rooms?" "I was too tired when I arrived in the afternoon and went to rest." "Didn't Kiki say she was going to tidy up?" "I saw that she didn't have time to tidy up, so I cleaned up after dinner." "You can change now." Jinwan smiled lightly. "The sooner you change, the easier it'll be. You won't have to go through all that trouble tomorrow." Song Cici and Song Kiki, "But my things are still here," Jinwan interrupted Song Kiki's words. "I've tidied everything up for you. There are only a few clothes on the bed, as well as your blanket, phone charger, and the like. I've helped you fold them neatly. In a while, you can bring them back to Cece's room or to another room. After all, that used to be my mother's room. Since I'm back, it's only right for me to stay there." "But it's already so late, and I'm still hugging my blanket and changing rooms. It's okay. Let Cece help you. It'll be quick. Then where should I sleep?" "Cece's room is cramped. After we grew up, we rarely stayed together. After all, the bed wasn't that big. Ask your mother to arrange another room for you. You can't always sleep in my mother's room, right?" Jinwan was still smiling, but she slowed down the speed at which she said, "My mother." The two sisters heard her deliberate reminder and did not say anything else. "Cousin, I see that your luggage is also in another room today. Kiki is used to sleeping in little aunt's room, so it's better to let Kiki stay there. You've only been back for a few days, so there's no need to change rooms." Song Cici said, "No." Jinwan straightforwardly rejected. "I need time to tidy up my mother's belongings. Kiki will always be staying there, and it won't be convenient for me to tidy up. What if she loses a phone charger and asks me to compensate for her phone? Huh. Cousin, you really know how to joke. Why would I ask you to compensate for my phone? Song Kiki and Song Cece exchanged glances. Their expressions were slightly awkward. Actually, they had thought of this method before. Jinwan could not even be bothered to continue arguing with them. She turned around and brought her luggage into her mother's room. Seeing that they were relatives, Jinwan could still tolerate them a little. However, now that she saw how vile this family was, she naturally could not take another step back. Seeing that she was so insistent, Song Kiki could only leave. However, Song Cece held her back and threw an unhappy expression at Jinwan. She then turned around and left. Jinwan ignored her. After entering the room, she made the bed again. Thankfully, there were new blankets and pillows in the cabinet. Although she did not know how long they had been in the cabinet, they still looked relatively clean. Previously, Song Kiki had most likely treated this room as a game room. Aside from Song Kiki staying here, it was likely that she had played here with her classmates and friends. Every time Jinwan swept the floor, she would find some things under the cabinets. There were even some old playing cards. Although her mother had passed away many years ago, there were so many rooms that could have been used. Yet they had to choose this room. She did not know what intentions they had. It was clear that they did not have the slightest bit of respect for their deceased aunt. Thankfully, this room was separate. Aside from a small door inside, there was also a main door that led to the courtyard. Jinwan directly locked the small door from the inside. She planned to enter and leave through the main door for the next 2 days. However, because Jinwan had forcefully changed rooms and cleaned up her mother's things one by one, Jinwan was even more disliked in the eyes of this family. She did not know what her aunt had secretly said to her grandmother. The next morning, when her grandmother saw that Jinwan had just woken up and was about to get some water to wash up, her gaze was not as happy. During breakfast, she heard her aunt discussing with her grandmother about repairing the room with the broken window. They wanted to fix the window as well to prevent Song Kiki from feeling uncomfortable. The moment her grandmother heard that her granddaughter was uncomfortable and was chased to that room by Jinwan, she immediately maneuvered her wheelchair back to her room. She took out 5 not-so-new 100 yuan bills from her piggy bank and handed them to her aunt, asking her to fix it. Yesterday afternoon, when Jinwan was sleeping there, this family did not take the initiative to fix it. They were all granddaughters, but this treatment. Haha. Jinwan's impression of her mother when she was young was that she was a talented, beautiful, and opinionated woman. She was born into such a family and environment, yet she was able to study abroad with her scholarship. This meant that her mother was indeed impressive. At the very least, she did not suffer much because of such a family environment. Instead, she knew how to fly out of this place. Chapter 620. Originally, Jinwan planned to leave the next afternoon. However, her grandmother suddenly felt unwell. Her aunt instructed Jinwan to call someone to send her to the hospital. Her intention was for Jinwan to pay for the treatment. Jinwan did not mind. Seeing that her grandmother was seriously ill, she directly called for a car to send her to the hospital. After struggling for a day and a night, she finally returned from the hospital. Her grandmother was only suffering from some elderly ailments and a slight chill from the autumn weather. She was fine. After sending her grandmother back from the hospital, she had just alighted from the car when she saw her aunt hanging out clothes in the yard. 2 of them were the dresses that the 2 sisters had taken from Jinwan. It was likely that they had been washed because they were dirty. Those 2 clothes could only be dry cleaned and could not be washed with water. Although they could still be worn after washing, they would no longer have their original shape. In any case, they would be very ugly. Jinwan only glanced at them and did not speak. When her aunt saw that they had returned, she asked about the old lady's condition. Knowing that she was fine, she did not ask further. After helping her grandmother back to her room to rest, Jinwan turned around and saw that Song Kiki was chewing on a lollipop. She seemed to be looking for something, but when she saw that Jinwan had returned, her gaze faltered. Jinwan seemed to notice something from her gaze. She abruptly rushed over and pushed open the door to Song Cece's room. As expected, she saw that Song Cece had placed Jinwan's laptop on her desk. However, Jinwan's work computer had a password. The two sisters had not been able to figure out the password and had even spilled water on the keyboard. The moment Jinwan saw the darkened screen and the water stains on the keyboard, her temples began to thump. Cousin, seeing that Jinwan's expression was not good, Song Kiki stood by the door and did not dare to speak. Song Cece also rushed to move away from the computer. She turned to see Jinwan walking over expressionlessly and rushed to say, "Cousin, I was just curious. I've only seen such an expensive computer in advertisements before, but I've never switched it on. We didn't see your work documents either. But this water, I really didn't mean to spill it. It's all Keek's fault for snatching it from me. That's why I accidentally." Jinwan pursed her lips, picked up the computer, and turned to leave. Seeing that Jinwan had left, the two sisters sighed. Song Cece even muttered softly, "Tisich, what are you pretending for?" Jinwan had already locked the small door from the inside. If she wanted to return to her mother's room, she had to walk outside. Earlier, when she walked out with the computer with a dark expression, her aunt was still hanging clothes. When she turned back and saw Jinwan's expression, she immediately knew what had happened. However, she did not apologize for her two daughters, but said with dissatisfaction, We haven't been able to buy a computer at home. Cece and Kiki were curious, so they took your computer to play. I heard that you set a password to prevent others from looking at it. Now that you've taken it back, is there a need to put on such an ugly expression?" G Nua and SG, she did not say she returned. And returned. Nuand, she returned. Uncle. Mo Chun G to, she had G. One G had said. He, and had he, G, and she could leave now. There was nothing wrong with the computer. She had a backup in the company. It was just that it was flooded. Even if she waited for it to dry, she did not know if it could still be used. It might affect her work, but it was not a big deal. But at this time, even if she bought a train ticket from G-City to the airport, it would only be available tomorrow morning. Even if she arrived at the airport, there were not many flights in this small city. There was only one flight to High City a day, which was tomorrow afternoon. It was already past time. She could only wait until tomorrow. Jinwan endured until the sky turned dark. She planned to leave early the next morning. Yesterday, when she was taking care of her grandmother in the hospital, there were too many sick elderly people in the small hospital. There were not many beds. She was squeezed into a room with more than 10 people. The people around her kept coughing, and the air was foul. She must have caught a cold, or perhaps she did not have a good rest yesterday. She felt dizzy, so she did not have dinner with them. She only went to get some hot water and gave herself a simple wipe in the room. She did not complain that this place was not convenient for her to bathe. Instead, it was her aunt who nagged at her for being too clean and always boiling water for her to bathe. It rained at night. Although G-City was not as cold as Jing City, it was still autumn. The night was still chilly. There was no air conditioning or heating in the room. Jinwan had caught a cold in the hospital yesterday. In fact, it had only been a few days since she had a high fever in Jing City. At 9 o'clock at night, Jinwan's stomach was not feeling well. However, those people did not have any leftover food. She got up, grabbed an umbrella, and walked a long way to a small supermarket to buy a bowl of instant noodles. The rainy night was not easy to walk, not to mention the muddy path. Her pants were wet and stuck to her legs. Her shoes were also soaked. The cold of the autumn rain was bone-piercing. Jinwan stepped through the mud all the way back. The family slept early. It was not even 10 o'clock, and the lights in the other rooms were already off. Jinwan couldn't imagine what her mother had experienced when she lived in this place more than 20 years ago, nor could she imagine what kind of story her mother had with Ji Hong-won and Xiao Zhenjuan. But this place made her inexplicably feel like she was trapped in a prison. The heavy rain and the road that didn't even have a street lamp in the distance were like a big net that could trap many people here for the rest of their lives. When she rushed back, Jinwan was already drenched. The rain was too heavy. She dragged her cold body back, slightly regretting running so far to buy instant noodles. Just as she was hesitating if she should find a kettle to boil the noodles, she suddenly sneezed. Jinwan raised her hand to rub her nose. She removed her wet clothes and wiped the rain away. She crawled under the blanket to warm herself up. However, after lying down, she only felt her body alternating between hot and cold. The familiar dizziness of being afraid of the cold and having a fever assaulted her. After an unknown period of time, Jinwan seemed to hear her phone ringing in her daze. She shivered under the blanket. She wanted to open her eyes, but her body was alternating between hot and cold. No matter how hard she tried, she could not open her eyes. The rain fell for the entire night and finally stopped when it was close to dawn. On the bumpy path, a black car drove over. There was no one around in the wee hours of the morning. Only the slightly brightening sky reflected the cold light of the car. Chapter 6:21. In her sleep, Jinwan heard her cell phone ringing again. She poked her head out of the quilt and tried to reach out to pick up her cell phone, but she only touched the edge of the cell phone and then put her hand down weakly, no longer moving. She was very cold, very sleepy, very tired, and did not have any strength. Finally, there was a knock on the door. Jinwan furrowed her brows in her sleep. She turned over and glanced toward the door. Although it was already past dawn and there was some light, she could not see clearly in the room. She could only see the wooden door being knocked on. The person outside did not knock very loudly, and since they were outside, she was probably the only one who could hear it. Jinwan wanted to speak, but her throat was painful. She looked toward the door, and her vision blurred. As the door creaked slightly, she closed her eyes again. He had been knocking on the door for more than 5 minutes, but there was still no movement. Shamu stood outside the door with some worry. He turned to look at Mo Jingshin, who was dressed in a black coat. The reason Mo Jingshin was certain that Jinwan was staying in this room was because of the heavy rain last night. There were footprints in the mud outside that led directly to this room. There was also a pair of shoes that Jinwan used to wear. However, the shoes were already soaked and there was mud around the heels. They were left outside the door. She was most likely afraid of dirtying the floor. The lights in the other rooms were not turned on. Only this room's light was on. It seemed like it had not been extinguished all night. However, after knocking for so long, with Jinwan's usual alertness, it was impossible that she did not hear it. Also, Jinwan's cell phone was in it. Every time he called, her cell phone would ring. Although the ringtone was very soft and wouldn't wake up the people living next door, the familiar ringtone confirmed Mo Jingshin's suspicion that Jinwan was indeed here. We've been knocking for so long. Co, Mo, could it be that Miss G only left her phone inside and is not in this room? Shinmu saw Mo Jingshin's cold and heavy expression and hesitated for a moment before speaking. No, in this kind of place, she wouldn't leave her phone too far away. The man's voice was cold and calm after a rainy night. But this door, open the lock. Mo Jingshin calmly glanced at the wooden door that was locked from the inside. Shimu hesitated for a moment before turning around to look for something to pry open the door. They definitely wouldn't be able to find a locksmith in this place, and it would be too late to call the police now. Furthermore, in this kind of place, each family's yard was next to each other. If they were to openly open the door and enter, it would only arouse the suspicion of the surrounding neighbors and family members. It would also cause a lot of trouble, and at that time, it would probably affect Miss G badly. But this lock, this kind of door was indeed not as difficult to open as the security doors outside, but Shimu really did not have any experience in picking locks. He found 2 iron wires and a thin wooden board, and after looking at the door for a long time, he tried to use the iron wire to look for the lock position. Shinmu was hooking the iron wire back and forth in front of the door. He also took a thin wooden board and placed it in the gap of the door to enlarge the gap. Mo Jingshin stood by the side, coldly staring at the wet and muddy shoes outside the door. The weariness in his eyes had been replaced by a hint of worry. Yesterday afternoon, he took a flight from Jing City back to High City. After returning to the company for a 2-hour meeting, he did not have any time to rest and immediately rushed to G City. There was only 1 flight a day from High City to G City. Even if they were to rush to the airport and wait for the boarding time, the fastest speed they could reach by car was only 2 hours. Thus, they decided to drive overnight from High City. Jinwan was not stubborn about her birth. This time, she suddenly came to G City. It was likely that Ji Hongwen had said something to her. Otherwise, she would not have suddenly come to such a place. For a wooden door in such a small place, the lock on the inside could be considered easy to open. However, due to the iron wire being hooked back and forth, there would still be some slight movements. If it wasn't for the fact that the person inside was not alert, they would have long woken up. The sound of the lock being unlocked came from the inside. Shenmu released a long breath. It seemed like if he wanted to change careers in the future, there might be a place for him in the locksmith industry. CEO Mo Shenmu pulled out the iron wire, turning back to look at Mo Jingshan. The man's gaze finally landed on the pair of muddy shoes. He directly pushed the door open and quickly stepped in. Shenmu did not dare to enter. After all, if Jinwan was really sleeping inside, it would definitely be inconvenient for him to enter. Thus, he very consciously waited outside the door while glancing around. The sky had yet to fully brighten, and most of the people here were still asleep. The light in the room was emitted from an old, yellow light bulb. It was not very bright, but at least he could see clearly. The moment Mo Jingshan entered the door, the first thing he saw was the wet clothes that Jinwan had thrown on the ground. There was also a plastic bag with a bowl of instant noodles that had not been eaten. There was also an umbrella that had fallen on the ground and was covered with water stains. When he turned to the side, he saw a very ordinary single bed. Jinwan was lying on the bed, covered with a quilt. She lay there motionlessly, with only one bare, white arm stretched out and landing by her phone. She did not have time to retract it, but maintained this position. Her brows seemed to be furrowed due to discomfort, and her cheeks were red. It was very similar to how she looked when she had a high fever all night in Jing City. Mo Jingshan approached the bed and placed his hand on Jinwan's forehead. As expected, it was very hot. Every year from summer to autumn, she had to pay special attention to her body temperature. Her body was afraid of the cold, and her old illness of catching a cold and having a fever had not been cured. In the past few months, the weather in China was already hot, but in just a few days, she actually had a fever several times. Mo Jingshan could not help but wonder how she had managed to survive in London for 3 years when the temperature was constantly maintained. Jinwan, the man moved his hand away from her forehead and pressed it against her burning cheeks. He bent down slightly to call her name. Jinwan furrowed her brows and did not open her eyes. Instead, she turned over slightly. When she turned over, the corner of the quilt around her opened a little, and Mo Jingshan immediately saw that she was not wearing any clothes under the quilt. He then glanced at the wet clothes on the ground. It was easy to guess that she must have taken off her clothes and laid down last night after being drenched in the rain. The man's expression darkened. He bent down and scooped out the burning woman who was curled up under the quilt. Chapter 622. Mo Jingshan's expression turned even uglier. He removed his black coat and wrapped it around the scorching and naked woman. At the same time, he instructed Shenmu, who was waiting by the door, "Shenmu, go to the car and bring a thin blanket over." Shenmu made a sound of acknowledgement and turned to retrieve a thin blanket from the car. This was the air conditioning blanket in the car. It was rarely used, but right now, it could be put to good use. When he entered, Jinwan was currently in Mo Jingshan's arms. Her eyes were closed, and she appeared to be unconscious. She was wrapped in a black coat, and there was nothing that should not be seen. However, Shenmu still handed the blanket over and turned to quickly leave. Mo Jingshan used the thin blanket to wrap Jinwan's body from top to bottom. He then wrapped the coat around her and directly carried her by the waist, walking out. It was no longer raining outside, but the roads were still muddy. When Mo Jingshan carried the person in his arms to the car, Shenmu reached out to open the car door. Mo Jingshan carried her into the back seat. At the same time, he did not intend to put her down. He calmly instructed, "To the hospital." G City was a very small city. It was difficult to find a hospital with a good environment. Furthermore, ever since Jinwan was carried out, she had been unconscious. Shenmu turned on the GPS and passed by a nearby hospital. It was the same hospital that Jean Wan had previously accompanied her grandmother to see a doctor. After taking a look, he felt that the environment was too bad and quickly drove past it. He headed for the largest hospital in G City, 10 kilometers away. The sky had just brightened, and there were not many people outside the hospital. The doctor on duty on the first floor of the hospital had just walked out when he suddenly saw a luxury car parked in front of the hospital. The back door of the car opened, and a tall man carried a woman out. The woman was wrapped in a blanket and a black coat, and her face could not be seen clearly. However, the man's face was so cold that it seemed as if ice could form on it. "Emergency, call the doctor." Shenmu hurriedly followed after parking the car. When Mo Jingshin carried Jinwan in, he turned to speak to the doctor who was standing outside in a daze. The doctor finally reacted and rushed to follow them to the emergency hall. Jinwan had been sleeping the entire time. It was only when the needle was pricked on the back of her hand that she opened her eyes due to the faint pain. However, she only opened her eyes a little, and her gaze was somewhat dazed and blurry. She could vaguely hear someone saying, "Virus flu." Did the patient come into contact with an unhygienic environment with a large number of flu germs these days? Her body's immune system isn't very good. She caught a cold at the same time, so it's inevitable that she would suddenly have a high fever. Who's talking? Who has a fever? Is she? How could he have a fever again? Before she could figure out, Jean Wan's consciousness gradually sank into the darkness again. She slept for a long time and had a dream. She actually dreamed of Mo Jingshin. She was in G City. How could there be Mo Jingshin? Why did she dream of him for no reason? In her dream, Mo Jingshin sat by the bedside. He picked up the cotton swab the doctor brought over, dipped it in water, and placed it on her dry, white lips to moisten them. Mo Jingshin's complexion was not very good, especially when the doctor came in to take her temperature once more and discovered that her fever had not subsided. His complexion could no longer be described as ugly. Jinwan thought that she was dreaming, alternating between waking and sleeping. This hospital was G City's top A hospital, and the doctor's skills were not bad. Based on her current condition, they could not torture her too much. They could only give her an injection here to reduce her fever and could not move her elsewhere. She could not endure such torment. The woman's hand was pricked with a needle, and it was in full drip by the bedside. Occasionally, she would furrow her brows and moan uncomfortably. It seemed like she was trying to wake up, but was unable to wake up. Shamu went to buy some porridge. By the time he returned, it was already past 10 in the morning. Jinwan had not woken up and was still sleeping. Mo Jingshin had already changed into clean clothes. They were made of warm and soft material. This was a hospital gown, and Mo Jingshin did not plan on letting Jinwan wear it. "CEO Mo, I've bought the porridge, but I'm afraid Miss G won't be able to drink it right now. Put down first." Shamu did not say more. He walked over to put the porridge down and carefully opened the lid. He placed the clean disposable spoon by the side. Mo Jingshin used the towel to wipe Jinwan's face. His hand once again touched her forehead and cheeks. She had always been like this. Whenever she caught a cold or had a fever, it would last for a long time. A few days ago, he had been paying attention to her in Jing City to prevent her from having a fever again. In the end, she had only been away from him for a few days. Several years ago, when she had a fever in the Yew Garden, he and Annie Chun had taken care of her. With someone by her side, she was fine. However, last night, this woman had a high fever in her room, and no one cared about her. If he had not rushed over in time, she most likely would have developed pneumonia in such a place. "CEO, Mo, you returned from Jing City to High City for a meeting and then rushed over here. You haven't rested at all. I'll take care of her here. Why don't you rest for a while?" Shenmu softly said. Mo Jingsheng glanced at the person on the bed and softly said, "There's no need. You go rest. I'll take care of her." Although Shenmu had driven all the way from High City and ran back and forth, the occasional fatigue on his body could not compare to CEO Mo's mental exhaustion. After leaving Jing City, he had not rested at all. When he came over, he only pretended to take a nap in the car and did not sleep at all. Mo Jingshen took the bowl of porridge and used a disposable spoon to scoop out the thinner rice soup. He placed it by Jin-Wan's mouth and slowly fed it into her mouth. Although Jin-Wan was unconscious, it was only because of the high fever that she couldn't open her eyes. It wasn't to the extent that she couldn't even swallow. However, because she was lying down, some soup would flow out of her mouth. Mo Jingshun patiently picked up a tissue to wipe her mouth and then slowly fed her, spoonful by spoonful. From the bowl of unopened instant noodles left on the ground in Jin-Wan's room, he could tell that she did not eat anything yesterday. If she was not so hungry or had a stomachache, she would not have braved the rain to buy food. This so-called grandmother's home. She had returned to stay for 2 to 3 days, but she did not even eat dinner. Her high fever was not discovered by anyone, and she even caught a cold. The moment he thought of Jin-Wan's life in G-City and those relatives who did not give her any family treatment, and Mo Jingshun's gaze became even colder. His movements of feeding Jin-Wan soup slowed down. Chapter 6:23. You're awake? The man's voice came from the bedside. Jin-Wan paused for a moment before her vision cleared up. She turned to look at the man dressed in a black shirt by the bedside. His shirt was slightly wrinkled, as though she had pressed against him when he carried her to the hospital. If you're awake, open your mouth. Eat the porridge first. You're still receiving injections. An empty stomach isn't good for your stomach. The man's low voice came again. Jin-Wan's gaze focused on Mo Jingshun. She was slightly confused. Where was this? Wasn't she in G-City? Wasn't Mo Jingshun in Jing-City? But why was he here? Was she still dreaming? Or was she not in G-City? Although there were a lot of things in her mind that she didn't understand, she opened her mouth consciously and cooperated with the man's action of feeding her porridge. She ate a lot of porridge in small mouthfuls. She felt much more comfortable as her stomach was no longer empty. Half a bowl of porridge was fed to her. A moment later, Mo Jingshun stood up and returned. He helped her up to lean against the headboard, placed a straw in a cup of warm water, and brought it to her mouth for her to drink. Jin-Wan had a fever for an entire night and was already dehydrated. After drinking a lot of water, she coughed several times. It wasn't until the man's hand patiently patted her back that she pursed her pale lips and raised her eyes to look at him with wide, round eyes. Why are you here? Mo Jingshun's expression was as calm as usual. When he heard her slightly hoarse voice, he brought the water to her mouth for her to drink. Jin-Wan cooperated and drank a few more mouthfuls. As she was drinking, she heard the man patiently feeding her say mildly, "If I weren't here, by the time you returned to High City, you would have already turned into a fool from a fever." I cough. Jin-Wan raised her uninjected hand and glanced at the surroundings of the ward. This was the best ward in the hospital in G-City. She then saw the sign of G-City Central Hospital by the side of the bed and realized that she was still in G-City. That was why Mo Jingshun had even come to a small place like G-City. When did you come? Jin-Wan struggled to speak in a hoarse voice. After speaking, she coughed several times. Mo Jingshun reached out to gently pat her back. Don't be in a hurry to ask. Let's talk about it first. After coughing for a while, Jin-Wan hurriedly took the water he handed her and took a big gulp. Then she felt better and leaned against the headboard. Because of a needle in her hand, she couldn't move and could only look at him. Seeing that she was staring at him, it was clear that she still wanted to ask. Mo Jingshun calmly said, "I knew you were in G-City, so I came to take a look. I didn't expect that you wouldn't pick up my calls since last night. I rushed to your place in the wee hours of the morning and forced the door open. You were lying under the blankets with a burning body. Even if a burglar entered, I'm afraid we wouldn't know." Jin-Wan's eyelids twitched. "Break the door?" The man's cold brows moved. "You should be glad that I was the one who pried the door open and not someone else." Jin-Wan, as the CEO of America's Shine Group, not only did he come to this small city where even birds wouldn't shit, he actually learned how to pry open doors. Jin-Wan lowered her head to look at the clothes on her body. She recalled the scene of her taking off her wet clothes and burrowing into the blankets yesterday, and did not say anything. She glanced at the drip of medicine in the drip and glanced out the window. She hoarsely asked, "What time is it now?" Not even 11. Did you drive here? Or by plane? She could not imagine the scene of Boss, Missouri flying to G City and then squeezing into a train with others to come to this small city. Driving. As expected, Great Boss, Missouri would never squeeze into a train in such a small town. Although she did want to see this scene, she did not expect to see it. I originally planned to return High City this afternoon, but I didn't expect to have a fever again. As Jean spoke, she raised her hand to touch her forehead. However, she was already running a fever, and the temperature of her hand was not low. She could not feel anything. She placed her hand down in frustration and did not have the mood to continue arguing with Mo Jingshan. She only said, "My luggage and computer are still at my grandmother's house. If I can leave the hospital in the afternoon, I still have to retrieve my luggage." Putting aside the current relationship between her and Mo Jingshan, she really did not plan on staying at her grandmother's house anymore. The sooner she could leave, the sooner she could. Even if she had to sit in Mo Jingshan's car, that would be fine. There's no rush. We'll talk about it after you've recovered. Right now, aside from fever, you also have a cold. You have to rest for at least 2 days. Leave your luggage here first. Either call Shunmu to retrieve it, or I'll accompany you. Mo Jingshan watched her patiently. Let's focus on recuperating your body that easily falls sick in the cool autumn weather first. Everything else is secondary. Jinwan indeed felt that her nose was suffocating. Previously, when she accompanied her grandmother to the hospital, the people around them kept coughing and sneezing. She knew that it was not a good thing. She had indeed been infected. She coughed once more and raised her hand to press against her aching throat. She rubbed her throat as she said, "The place I stayed in last night was my mother's old room. I've already put away all the things in her room. I don't plan on returning to this place in the future." She couldn't tell if she wanted to vent her pin-up emotions or explain why she came to G City. However, after saying this, she raised her eyes only to see that the man only patiently patted her back and poured her a glass of warm water due to her sore throat. When he returned to the bed, he asked her, "Do you feel better now?" Jinwan's eyes lit up. She didn't know what to say, but she didn't know what to say. Jinwan nodded. Much better. At the very least, she felt much more comfortable than last night when she was drenched and cold from running back with an umbrella. Perhaps it was because she drank too much water after waking up. Previously, when she was asleep, she had been on an 4-drip. After just a short while, Jinwan felt the urge to go to the toilet. However, she was too embarrassed to say it. "Can I get off the bed first?" Jinwan asked as she looked at the remaining medicine in the bottle. "Why do you want to get off the bed?" She did not say it, but she was truly suffocating. She straightened her body and prepared to get off the bed. The man saw that she was clearly weak, but still insisted on getting off the bed. He immediately saw through her intentions. "You want to go to the bathroom?" Jinwan was silent. She had only just sat up. How could he see through her? Jinwan did not move. The needle in her hand prevented her from moving. She lowered her eyes to look at the back of her hand, feeling conflicted about how she should go. Chapter 6:24. It was very awkward. Under Mo Jingshan's amused gaze, Jinwan could only raise her hand. "I want to go to the bathroom." The man's brows moved slightly. He chuckled lightly because she had finally taken the initiative to ask for his help. It was also because of her soft tone. Jinwan, on the other hand, cursed this man in her heart over and over again. Yet, when Great Boss Missouri finally reached out to help her up, she still had to maintain a pleading smile on her face. Mo Jingshan did not only help her up. When the nurse pushed open the door and entered, he asked the nurse to come over and help take the medicine bottle. He then carried Jinwan up. The young nurse raised the medicine bottle and followed behind. She watched as the tall and handsome man carried her into the bathroom, and her eyes shone with envy. When she saw him carry Jinwan into the bathroom, she was so envious that her face turned red. It was rare to see such a good-looking man who doted on his girlfriend so much. Furthermore, this man's identity was not ordinary. From his dressing, aura, speech, and gaze, it was clear that he was not a simple person. He should be his girlfriend, right? Or a couple. Either way, the two of them looked so young. They were either dating or newly married. Otherwise, How could they be so affectionate? Even when going to the bathroom, he had to carry her. The young nurse raised the bottle outside the door and cursed silently. Finally, the bathroom door opened again. When Jinwan was carried out, her face was suspiciously red. The young nurse instantly understood. Usually, patients who were hospitalized for injections because they were not feeling well often needed their family members to help them take off their pants when they went to the bathroom. Earlier on, this gentleman was most likely helping her take off her pants. This was clearly a common occurrence in the hospital. However, the two people before her did not seem to match the image of a patient being taken care of in the hospital. This scene, she did not dare to imagine. The more she thought about it, the more her maiden heart was about to overflow. After being carried back to the bed, the nurse helped hang the medicine bottle by the bedside. Jinwan thanked her, and Mo Jingshan nodded slightly at the nurse. The young nurse continued to leave with a red face. Jinwan took another look at her cell phone, which was placed by the bed, but she didn't see anything else. She guessed that when Mo Jingshan took her away, she must have been unconscious at that time, so he only took her cell phone with him. Everything else was still in that room. When she was there, the family couldn't wait to search her inside and out. Now that she was gone and suddenly disappeared, it was likely that many things in her bag would be searched again. "I'll go back in the afternoon to get my things," Jinwan said. "What do you have? Just send Shinmu over to get it. I'll have to take everything in my suitcase and bag with me, but I'm guessing that some important items will be found by my two weird cousins. I'll have to go back and look for them myself, lest I miss anything." Actually, he could leave these matters to Shinmu. However, hearing Jinwan's words, Mo Jingshan only glanced at her and softly said, "Let's talk about it after your fever subsides. I'll accompany you back." Thankfully, Jinwan cooperated and drank more hot water. After the anti-inflammatory and fever medicine was administered, it took another hour for Jinwan's fever to subside. It was already noon. Before Jinwan decided to return, Shimu had gone to buy some lunch. He allowed Jinwan to eat a little to replenish her energy. She could finally get off the bed and plan to head back to get her things. At her grandmother's house, when everyone woke up early in the morning, they discovered that Jinwan had disappeared. The door was also open. The lock on the wooden door was not clear, so no one was able to guess how Jinwan had left. There were no signs of anyone else entering either. They only saw that her cell phone was gone, so they assumed that she had gone out to buy something. After all, her bag and luggage were still at home. Song Cici and Song Kiki were used to treating this room as a game room. Seeing that Jinwan was not around, they openly walked in and circled around. They only grew suspicious when they saw the wet clothes on the floor. However, not long after, Song Kiki suddenly spoke up from the side. "Big sister, look at these." Song Cici turned to see that Song Kiki was holding onto Jinwan's wallet. She had just found it from Jinwan's bag. There were several cards in the wallet, including some business-related financial cards, gold and silver cards, and a black card. Jinwan had yet to step out of the hospital when her phone received several messages from a bank. Most of them were regarding the bank's PIN being entered incorrectly, causing the bank to treat it as lost and freeze the card number. It didn't matter if the card number was frozen. After returning to High City, she could take some time to go to the bank to complete the procedures. However, she never expected that after leaving her bag at home for only a few hours, this family actually dared to touch her wallet and swipe her card. Thankfully, her PIN was not her birthday, nor was it some numbers that these people could guess. Otherwise, it was likely that this family would not have used her card to swipe a few million yuan. The two sisters were in a certain shopping mall in G City. They held various receipts in their hands and were about to pay. However, no matter how they tried, they could not guess the correct PIN. In the end, only the black card was left. The passwords were all wrong. The two sisters were angered to the point of turning green. This kind of black card was used by some banks as a supreme VIP card. Without a deposit of more than 10 million yuan, it was impossible for the bank to issue such a card. Moreover, this card was also divided into several levels. One was the supreme card with a certain amount of deposit, and the other was the global unlimited secondary card. It could be swiped anywhere, and even if the money in the card was not enough, it could be swiped without a limit. The owner of this card had to be trusted by the major banks to be able to use it. When they were at home, they specially used their phones to check online. Anyway, no matter what grade the card was, it was enough to prove that Jean Wan was really rich. Because of this, the two of them ran out with Jean Wan's wallet. Even if they did not know the PIN, Jean Wan's wallet still had her ID card. Originally, they wanted to take the ID card to the bank to withdraw money, but the bank refused because they were not the real person. In the end, the two of them took the card and ID card to various specialty stores to spend money. They bought a lot of gold, silver, diamond jewelry, branded clothes, watches, computers, cell phones, and a bunch of other things. They were all in a shopping mall. And then they took the receipts to pay. In the end, all the cards were used. Each of them had a chance to enter the PIN 3 times, but all of them were wrong. How could it be wrong? What's Ani's birthday? Could she have used her mother's birthday as the PIN? Or her mother's death anniversary? Chapter 6:25. Most importantly, before they left, they told their mother about Jean Wan's cards. They also told her that there were at least tens of millions of yuan in the black cards. Jean Wan's aunt was extremely excited and had them go out to buy things first. She wanted to ask the neighbors where the best houses in G City were. They wanted to move to another house. With so much money, they could at least buy the biggest house in G City. If one wasn't enough, they could buy 2 more for Cece and Kiki, 1 for each of them near the university. In the end, the 2 sisters did not spend a single cent on these cards. Instead, they excitedly took a taxi to the city in the morning to buy things. They had already spent several hundred yuan on the taxi and food, and they had all taken out of their own wallets. The last black card ended up being locked due to the same password error 3 times. When Jean Wan returned to her grandmother's home, Song Cece and Song Kiki had just returned. Their hands were empty, and their expressions were extremely ugly. Her aunt did not know that the cards could not be swiped. She was sitting in the yard excitedly calling all sorts of relatives, saying that they were going to change houses. She also said that after Cece and Kiki got married, had children, and raised children, they would have a large sum of money. She also wanted to buy a few houses near the university and open a shop to do business. She also wanted to invite relatives over for a meal. She had even thought of a hotel for the relatives. It would be the most expensive 5-star hotel in G City. Jean Wan had just stepped out of the door when she heard her aunt's voice on the phone. Her excitement was clear on her face, as though the money was already in her hands. She suddenly saw Song Cece and Song Kiki returning. She was about to ask them why they came back empty-handed, but before she could ask, she saw a black car parked outside. As soon as they saw the car, although they couldn't recognize the brand, they could tell it was definitely not cheap. The mother and daughter were all stunned, but then they saw Jean Wan open the door and get out of the car. Seeing that Jean Wan had actually returned, the 2 sisters were frightened and rushed to hide her wallet behind her back. When she alighted from the car, Jean Wan wore a smile, but it did not reach her eyes. She walked into the yard and glanced at Song Cece, who was trying hard to hide her hands behind her back. "How is it? You didn't even guess a single password correctly?" Jean Wan asked with a smile. But although she seemed to be smiling, she suddenly directly exposed their behavior, which was almost equivalent to theft. The expressions on the faces of the 2 sisters could instantly be described as colorful. Her aunt was startled. Her earlier excitement seemed to have been doused with a pail of cold water by Jean Wan's words. No wonder Cece and Kiki had returned empty-handed. Did that mean the 2 of them hadn't spent a single cent with Jean Wan's card? Earlier, she had invited over 10 relatives over for a meal, and even said that they were going to eat at the most expensive 5-star hotel. First aunt's face froze as well. "Give Jean Wan's words." She smiled. Wan Tang. She had already made herself clear. Song Cece's expression was livid. She held back her anger for a moment and suddenly took out her purse and threw it at Jean Wan. However, Jean Wan dodged it in time and caught the purse before it fell to the ground. Seeing Jean Wan's nimble movements, Song Cece, who had just swung the purse with brute force, was speechless. The 2 sisters' complexions were very poor, and the eldest aunt's expression was not much better. Seeing that Jean Wan's complexion appeared somewhat haggard, she did not guess that she had been in the hospital for an entire morning because of a high fever. She only thought that she had gone out to fool around last night. She immediately reprimanded her. "Since you're so rich, what's wrong with giving some money to your two sisters to spend? You've been back for 2 or 3 days. What have you bought for home? Those small gifts and trinkets probably add up to less than 10,000 yuan. That card of yours has at least 10 million yuan in it. You're really stingy to give such a small gift to your family." Jean Wan sneered. "Auntie, don't you think too highly of yourself? Don't you know why I came to G City? Even after my mother passed away, you didn't go to High City to visit her. Now that my grandmother is sick, I only came here to see her because of our blood ties. Based on our relationship, I'm already giving you face by coming back. The gifts and supplements I bought are also my sincerity. But I don't seem to owe you anything. Even when my grandmother was in the hospital 2 days ago, I kept a filial heart and stayed by her bedside to take care of her. Even if you want to nitpick, I'm afraid you won't be able to find out what I've done. How can you stand here and say that I'm stingy? Regardless of whether I'm rich or not, even a beggar on the street knows that if they want money, they have to bow down and thank me or show off their talent in singing and playing the eru. You're stretching out your hands. Aren't you embarrassed?" Jean Wan directly raised the wallet in her hand. Her eyes seemed to be filled with mockery. "Besides, not only did you stretch out your hands, you even dare to steal my wallet. It's only because you're related to my mother that I didn't bother to call the police. Otherwise, I could have detained you and your mother for theft at any time. We didn't steal it." Song Kiki was frightened by Jean Wan's sudden toughness and coldness. Yesterday, Jean Wan clearly gave them some face on account of her mother and appeared to be tolerating it. But now, she even dared to call the police. Song Kiki carefully said, "You didn't lock the door before you left. My sister and I went in to help you tidy up the house. When we saw your wallet on the floor, we took it out to take a look. Anyway, didn't you promise to leave us 200,000 yuan? We were in a hurry to buy things, so we took the wallet and left. Besides, even if we took it, we didn't spend it, right? We didn't spend it, and it's all frozen." Jean Wan suddenly smiled at Song Kiki. "Don't say that I didn't agree to that so-called 200,000 yuan. Even if I agreed, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to take it out. Why? You're clearly so rich." Song Sisi was also anxious. She originally thought that they had at least 200,000 yuan to buy things. Jean Wan raised the wallet again and waved it in front of her. She was full of smiles. "Why? Because the cards have all been frozen." Song Sisi and Song Kiki's faces instantly paled. "How is that possible? You always have cash on you." Chapter 6:26. The two sisters' expressions faltered. They had indeed searched through Jean Wan's wallet. Jean Wan did not have much cash in it. As they had been thinking about the money in the card, they had not been interested in the 1 or 2,000 yuan worth of cash and had not touched it. But now, Jean Wan was saying that she did not even have the 200,000 yuan? Song Sisi and Song Kiki immediately panicked. They turned to look at their mother. The more the aunt heard, the uglier her expression became. She abruptly shouted angrily, "Since you don't plan on giving us a single cent, why did you come back? My things are still here. If I don't come back to take them, am I supposed to leave them for you?" The moment her aunt heard that Jean Wan was really planning on leaving and did not plan on leaving them any face, she recalled the promises she had made to her relatives earlier and how her hopes of buying a house and various other things were about to be dashed. She held herself as Jean Wan's elder and raised her hand to give her a slap. However, the moment she raised her hand, before she could swing it down, her wrist was abruptly held. Jean Wan calmly and indifferently looked at her. She shook her hand off, causing her aunt to stumble and take a step back. Just as she was about to scold her, she suddenly saw the door of the black car outside open once more. Two young men alighted from the car. The man who alighted from the driver's seat appeared to be very elegant. As for the man who opened the back door, he was dressed in a black suit with a black coat over it. From the moment he appeared, it was obvious that he was not an ordinary person. The moment Song Cici and Song Kiki saw Mo Jingshan, their eyes widened. Shenmu followed behind Mo Jingshan. Jinwan saw their expressions and immediately understood what was going on. She turned back to see that Mo Jingshan had already approached. For this man to appear in such a small place, his aura was very different from the surroundings. However, it caused Jinwan's heart to feel more at ease. Compared to a few days ago when she was alone in her grandmother's chaotic home, she felt much more at ease. Although she did not wish to admit it, she felt especially at ease wherever Mo Jingshan was. "Miss G, what can I do for you?" When Shenmu was in the car earlier, he saw that this middle-aged woman seemed to want to hit someone. Thankfully, Jinwan raised her hand to stop her and did not stand there to be beaten. Otherwise, CEO Mo would most likely burn down this house in a fit of anger. Thus, when Shenmu spoke, he directly walked behind Jinwan. He was concerned and respectful toward Jinwan, but his gaze was cold as he looked at the mother and daughter. His expression clearly showed that they were not to be trifled with and warned them to restrain themselves. "Just help me take out the suitcase from that room." "Thank you, Shenmu." Jinwan turned her eyes. Her earlier cold and domineering attitude toward the mother and daughter changed, and she smiled at Shenmu. Shenmu nodded and entered the room that he had personally pried open in the wee hours of the morning. "What else do you want to take?" Mo Jingshan had already walked to Jinwan's side. His gaze did not even glance at the mother and daughter. His voice was cold and indifferent. If Shenmu was dissatisfied with their vile behavior earlier, Mo Jingshan's attitude toward them was indifference and disregard. His entire being exuded an unapproachable aura, causing them to not even dare to speak to him out of curiosity. "I don't think so." Jinwan gently patted her purse against her palm. Initially, she thought that they would search through her bag and suitcase. However, since they had already taken her purse, it was likely that they would place all their attention on the cards and would not touch anything else. Thus, there was nothing else for her to search. When Jinwan alighted from the car, she was still dressed in the same clothes that she was wearing when she was lying on a hospital bed. It had just rained last night, and the weather was slightly chilly. Mo Jingshan only glanced at her thin clothes before casually removing his coat and placing it on her. Jinwan, on the other hand, stood motionless. She was well aware of how Mo Jingshan usually treated her in private. In any case, this man would never purposely display his affection in front of others. This was completely out of his instincts to show his concern for her. Suddenly, such a high-class car arrived. Even the driver appeared to be dressed expensively. The other man was even more eye-catching. Furthermore, from his actions of helping Jinwan with her coat, Song Cici and Song Kiki thought that they were watching an idol drama. They were both envious and secretly jealous. They did not know what relationship Jinwan had with this extraordinarily handsome man. "Who are you?" Auntie asked directly, her eyes sizing up the man from head to toe. In the past, when she saw rich men on television wearing suits, they were mostly sponsored by brands. No matter how she looked at it, it was obvious that they were fake. However, the man before her clearly wore a very formal black suit, yet he wore it casually. There was not the slightest bit of effort, as though he had always been standing in this position. Everything was beneath his feet, and no one could easily reach him. He clearly exuded a noble and cold aura that others could not help but look up to. Yet, he was unbelievably gentle toward Jinwan. It was very obvious that he was not someone from the same world as them. The difference between clouds and mud. At this moment, these four words finally had a completely understandable interpretation. Mo Jingshan appeared as though he did not hear her words. He only said to Jinwan, "If you're cold, get in the car first. Have Shenmu bring out the things. If there's anything missing, have him look for it in the other rooms. It's all right. Compared to Jing City a few days ago, this place is much warmer." Jinwan's fever had just subsided, so she was slightly afraid of the cold. She was not as weak as Mo Jingshan imagined. However, this coat did indeed make her feel much warmer. "I'm asking you a question. Who are you? How dare you enter our courtyard? Can't you hear what I'm saying by standing here?" Her aunt saw that she was completely ignored and felt a little embarrassed. She could not help but raise her voice. However, aside from raising her voice, it was unable to suppress the man's indifferent and unapproachable aura. Mo Jingshin's gaze finally landed on the middle-aged woman. As Jinwan's husband, is there a problem with me standing here? Her aunt's expression immediately faltered. Husband. Jinwan's expression was also slightly dumbfounded. How could he have the cheek to say the word husband? She did not have the time to investigate the divorce. He was clearly her ex-husband. She did not speak and only secretly glared at the man from the side. Her aunt's gaze scanned Mo Jingshin up and down several times. For a moment, she did not even dare to show her expression. 2 days ago, she had said that Jinwan might marry some terrible old man. Her mind buzzed, and she felt as though her face had been slapped loudly. Furthermore, this man did not look like a small character. Regardless of whether it was his net worth or his background, he was most likely even more prominent than the Ji family. Chapter 6:27. Although her heart was filled with jealousy and disbelief, her aunt's lips trembled for a long time before she forced out a smile. In order to avoid offending someone she could not afford to offend, and since she was still thinking about buying a house and the money, she forced a smile and said, when did Jinwan get married? We didn't even know. Since we're a family, look at how Jinwan's card has been frozen. It's not convenient for her to take any money from home. Can you help her out? Based on Jinwan's understanding of human nature, she had never imagined that a person could be this shameless. Even in a small city, the majority of the people were simple and honest. It was rare to see someone as thick-skinned as his aunt. Yet, Mo Jingshin only coldly glanced at her aunt. His lips curved slightly, but it was cold and indifferent. Between husband and wife, isn't it normal for the wife to manage the money? My cards are all in Wan's hands. If there are no accidents, they should have been frozen today. The smile on her aunt's face immediately collapsed. She abruptly turned to look at Song Cici and Song Kiki. These two sisters were first bewitched by Mo Jingshin, and in the end, Mo Jingshin's words woke them up. Seeing her mother glare at them, Song Cici furrowed her brows and asked awkwardly, "Rich people like you, how can you not leave a single card for yourself? Cousin's wallet indeed has quite a number of cards. We can't tell who each of them belongs to, but the two of you combined shouldn't only have so few cards." Mo Jingshin's gaze finally landed on Song Cici's face. He coldly and indifferently glanced at her. One card can be used for many purposes. How many more do you need? Song Cici choked. Indeed, any black card was worth at least 10 million yuan. If it was a limitless black card, then there was no need to keep other cards in her wallet. It seemed like these rich people did not need to use credit cards to get loans, nor did they need to keep other useless cards in their hands. One card was enough. Besides, the cards in Jinwan's wallet were already quite a lot. But Song Cici was still unwilling. She was even more unwilling that Jinwan was actually married, and that her husband was someone who seemed to have walked out of a television show. Many male models and good-looking celebrities could not compare to his face. Furthermore, his figure was so tall and perfect. This was enough to make the two sisters' hearts sour. If they did not receive any money now, they would most likely be so angry that they would not be able to sleep well for several days. However, Mo Jingshin directly cut off her words. You claim to be her family, but you didn't even know that she had high fever last night. It was rare for Wan to go out on her own. I was worried, so I drove through the night to accompany her. In the end, the moment I arrived, I saw my sweetheart lying unconscious on the bed with a high fever. On the ground was a bucket of instant noodles that she braved the rain to buy. Clearly, you didn't even leave her any dinner. When has she ever suffered such grievances? Seeing that you're family, I tolerated it for a few days, but it seems like you don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Do you really think that her temper is so soft that you can bully her as you please? The man's voice sounded mild and calm, but it was so cold that it was as though ice was about to fall. It caused one to shiver. Although Jinwan did not feel like she was about to fall, she felt goosebumps all over. Sweetheart? What the hell? No, it's not like that. Last night, she was the one who said she wasn't hungry. From her aunt's reply, it was clear that she did not care about Jinwan's life or death. She had clearly heard that Jinwan had fainted with a high fever last night, but when she opened her mouth, it was not to ask about her fever. Instead, it was to explain that she did not leave any food for her. Jinwan's lips curved coldly. In her heart, she was still rejoicing that her mother had left this place. If your daughter doesn't have an appetite at night and doesn't eat, do you prepare some dinner for her and place it in the fridge to heat it up when she's hungry in the middle of the night? Mo Jingshin looked at his aunt. His dark eyes were filled with coldness and displeasure. The scene of Jinwan pitifully curled up in the blanket in the wee hours of the morning was still fresh in his mind. Thinking of that scene, the man's gaze became even colder from the autumn rain, devoid of any warmth. His aunt's lips moved, but she could not say anything for a long time. Usually, when Wan is by my side, she has never suffered such grievances. It's rare for her to return to her grandmother's home and experience everything. For her to be able to stand here patiently, she can already be considered to have a good temper. If it was me, if anyone dared to mess around in front of her, I'm afraid that person would have to pay a certain price. Right now, Wan is only here to retrieve her things. If I didn't see wrongly, you raised your hand to hit her, didn't you? The man's cold and deep voice was by her side. Jinwan glanced sideways at Mo Jingshin's cold and indifferent face. This man usually did not speak much. Right now, it was rare for him to speak a few more words, but every single one of them was for her. She pursed her lips. His aunt originally wanted to raise her voice to regain some face. However, when she raised her head and met the man's cold and indifferent gaze, the heavy sense of danger caused her to shiver uncontrollably. It was as though if she dared to say another word that would make Jinwan unhappy, his earlier promise of making them pay would immediately become reality. Earlier, it was a misunderstanding. His aunt retracted her gaze and did not dare to meet Mo Jingshin's eyes. She felt that this man was definitely not someone to be trifled with. If these poor and desolate people really offended him, it was likely that they would be squashed to death like ants. His aunt stealthily reached out and pinched Song Cici and Song Keek's waist harshly. The two sisters' eyes instantly reddened. They cooperated by the side and softly said, choking with sobs, Right. It's a misunderstanding. It's all a misunderstanding. Cousin, please don't hold it against us. It's all a misunderstanding." Seeing the mother and daughter trio's appearance, Jinwan's eyes turned cold for a moment. All these years, she was used to being domineering in the business world. She was also used to putting on a tough attitude when facing the evil in the business world. This time, she had returned to her grandmother's home with the intention of visiting relatives. She had also considered her mother's relationship with them and did not treat them too harshly. She had tolerated them for 2 days in a tolerant manner, but in the end, they had almost stepped on her head. As expected, when dealing with people like them, being too tolerant and caring for family was useless. She might as well let them see her bottom line from the start. If she made a wrong move, it would be easy for them to take advantage of this loophole. Chapter 628. Her gaze then landed on the clothes Song Kiki and Song Cici were wearing. Those were the clothes she had snatched from her. These two sisters really had a soft spot for her clothes. According to the way they wore them, coupled with her aunt's incessant washing, these clothes would most likely be ruined in a few days. Jinwan did not say anything more. The mockery in her eyes was obvious. She glanced at them a few times before shifting her gaze away. She then saw that Shunmu had already packed her luggage and was carrying it out. Shunmu carried the luggage out and approached Jinwan's side. He then respectfully and politely asked, "Miss G, everything I can see in your room, including your luggage. Is there anything else you want to take with you?" Right now, Jinwan did not wish to leave anything for them. However, the only thing she had were the small gifts she had bought from the airport and a few sets of clothes. Since the clothes had already been worn, there was no way she would wear them again. Furthermore, based on the way they wore them, they would most likely be thrown away in less than 2 months. Thinking about it, she did not seem to have left anything else behind. Jinwan turned toward her mother's room. There shouldn't be anything else. I'll go in and take a look. All right. Shunmu directly picked up the luggage and turned to leave. He opened the trunk of the car and placed the luggage inside. Seeing Jinwan return to her mother's room, Song Cici and Song Keek's gazes landed on Mo Jingshin once more. Both of them were in their 20s. Even though they knew he was Jinwan's husband, they could not help but take a few more glances at him. Song Cici even raised her hand to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. She blushed as she said, "That, cousin-in-law, since you're already here, don't be in a hurry to leave. You should also persuade cousin to not be angry with us. We're all relatives. In the future, if we sisters want to work in a big city after graduation, we'll have to ask cousin to help us. We'll all visit each other often in the future. There's no need to be two." Song Cici had yet to finish her words when the man before her turned around and walked toward the direction Jinwan had gone. It was as though he did not hear her words at all. Being ignored like that, Song Cici immediately felt a little awkward. However, she couldn't help but sneak a peek behind her. All she could see was the tall and slender back of the man. She had never seen such a handsome man before. Not to mention Song Cici, even Song Keek's eyes were glued to him. Due to her shyness, she tugged at her sleeves tightly, biting her lips as she glanced at him from time to time. However, from start to finish, the two sisters did not receive a single glance from him. He did not even give them a cold glance. After entering, Jinwan checked to see if there was anything left, including some charging cables and so on. Then she went to the drawers and cabinets to see if her mother's belongings had been taken away. After making sure they were all gone, she turned around and was about to go out. Just as she was about to leave, she saw Mo Jingshin enter. Thinking of what the man had just said outside, Jinwan glanced at him and was about to leave. However, the moment she brushed past him, the man held her wrist. "Have you checked everything? Is there nothing left?" Nothing else. You can leave now." Jinwan's voice sounded calm, but also a little gloomy. Mo Jingshin glanced at her from the side. "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking." Jinwan turned to glare at him. How did the great CEO Mo manage to say something like precious darling? The man's eyelids twitched slightly. His cold and mild face carried a hint of a smile. What precious darling? He was clearly the one who had said it earlier. Jinwan ignored him and was about to leave. However, the man abruptly pulled her into his embrace with the strength of his grip. At the same time, he easily turned around and took 2 steps forward, pressing her against the wall by the open door. "What are you doing?" If the people outside approach, they'll be able to see. From her angle, Jinwan could see Song Cici and Song Kiki peering in from the corner of her eyes. However, they did not dare to approach, so they could only see their actions from this angle. However, they could not clearly see what was going on inside the door. "Which part of me doesn't seem like I'm holding you in my hands like a precious darling?" Are these words very strange? As Mo Jingshin spoke, he moved even closer to Jinwan. The distance between them immediately closed. It was as though the man only needed to bend down by 2 centimeters in the next moment to directly kiss her on the lips. Jinwan subconsciously stepped back, and the back of her head knocked against the wall. Mo Jingshin supported himself with one hand, turning his head to kiss Jinwan's lips. His sudden movement caused Jinwan's heart to flutter. Her body reacted faster than her brain. When their lips were about to touch, she rushed to the side to avoid it. The man's kiss landed on her cheek, but he did not stop. He only curved his lips into a smile and kissed her cheek again. Following her movement, he kissed her ear. Mo Jingshin, what kind of place is this? Don't mess around. The man gripped her hand against his chest. When Jinwan turned to reprimand him, he accurately captured her lips. As Jinwan trembled against the wall, he directly kissed her. Song Cici and Song Kiki were worried that Jinwan would bring the rest of the things in the house with her. It would be fine if she only took the things in her suitcase, but they were also afraid that Jinwan would take the good things in the house with her. The two waited for a long time, but they did not see them come out. Thus, they tacitly exchanged glances and took a few steps in that direction. However, after taking 4 or 5 steps, they could clearly see the scene that caused one's heart to pound and make one's face blush. Due to this place and the environment, Jean Wan was extremely nervous. Her hand remained pressed against the man's chest. Although she was clearly pushing him away, in the eyes of others, it appeared as though she was trying to reject him. The tall man pressed Jean Wan against the wall. He supported himself with one hand against the wall behind her while the other held her waist gently. His kiss was deep and tender. The instant Song Cici and Song Kiki saw this scene, their footsteps froze. They could not help but swallow their saliva. Their eyes were filled with envy, and they did not know if they should continue approaching or move further away. Just as the two sisters stood there awkwardly and enviously, Jean Wan finally pushed the man away. However, she only managed to push him away by an arm's length. At the same time, she sensitively sensed the gazes from outside. The moment she saw the two sisters, she angrily slapped Mo Jingshan's arm. Chapter 629. Jean Wan watched the man's smiling face. You've actually learned how to show off your love in front of others? Are you Mo Jingshan or not? You actually know how to use such a senseless method. The man lightly curved his lips, revealing a patient and gentle smile that could only be seen in front of her. I don't like to see you being bullied. As a prop that came to your door, aside from showing off my love, I can only destroy this family's foundation in one night. But after all, I was your mother's relative when she was alive. Do you want me to use the most gentle method or the cruelest method to take revenge for you, eh? He really switched between gentleness and cruelty so easily. However, if it wasn't because of her mother, Mo Jingshan most likely wouldn't just sit and wait for death. He definitely wouldn't let it go so easily. Jean Wan knew that his words made sense, and it was for her own good. After thinking for a moment, she put on a straight face and slapped his arm as though venting her anger. However, in return, the man smiled indulgently, as though he really liked seeing her acting so awkward and about to explode. Finally, when Jean Wan pushed him again, Mo Jingshan released his hand. However, he directly held her hand and led her out. The two sisters watched as this unbelievably handsome man held Jean Wan's hand and appeared to be very affectionate with her. They stood in the yard silently, but their hearts were filled with all sorts of emotions. Jealousy, unwillingness, and a sense of inferiority surged up. They no longer felt the dark satisfaction they had when they tried to extort Jean Wan's money 2 days ago, nor did they feel the satisfaction of being able to bully the young miss of a wealthy family. They only felt as though everything had been bounced back, and their eyes turned red from the sourness. Seeing that they were really leaving, Jean Wan's aunt rushed over, speaking fawningly. Jean Wan, didn't you say you had a fever last night? If you're not feeling well, don't be in such a hurry to leave. It's too tiring to travel all the way here. Why don't you stay at home for a few more days? Jean Wan's fever had indeed subsided not too long ago, but she did not wish to continue staying here. Do you want to stay? Mo Jingshan's long, slender fingers held Jean Wan's hand in his palm. Jean Wan found that once Mo Jingshan decided to act, his acting skills were really good. Even his every action and tone was like a good husband who was being controlled by his wife. Not only was his money and cards in her hands, but even the way he spoke and the way he cared for her were especially gentle and patient. Even his usual words were changed, perfectly portraying the image of a good husband who only cared about his wife. She said, "No, but Grandma's health is not very good. On the day I accompanied her in the hospital, I found that the medicine she usually takes is cheap fake medicine. She doesn't have enough nutrition. Before we leave, we will buy more medicine and food. After we send them to Grandma, we will leave directly." Hearing Jean Wan's words, her aunt's expression immediately changed. She did not dare to speak and directly retreated to the side, not responding. Of course, she knew what was going on with those cheap, fake medicines. She was the one who bought them. After all, the old lady was already so old. Since many years ago, she could not do anything and could only eat and drink for free. This time, after being hospitalized for a cerebral hemorrhage, she was directly paralyzed and could not take care of herself. Not only did it cost money, but it also required people to take care of her. She also had to buy all sorts of expensive medicines to maintain her life. Those medicines were not cheap, so she simply contacted someone to buy some medicine bottles from the black market. She casually filled them with medicine that could reduce internal heat. After all, they wouldn't go bad, nor would they be poisonous. She did not expect to be discovered by Jinwan. Jinwan did not expect her aunt to feel any guilt. For a woman in her 50s like her, who would only shout herself hoarse for small benefits, some deep-rooted bad habits would last a lifetime. But sooner or later, she would have her own retribution. It was just that the time had not come. In the past, Jinwan only needed to hug her and return home from the company on time to cook a meal for her. That was enough to make her obedient. But right now, it was not so easy for Jinwan to openly gain her favor. Even for someone like Mo Jingshun, who had always planned everything, he rarely admitted that it was difficult. G-City was not large. Shenmue drove them to buy things. After driving for about 40 minutes, they arrived at a relatively large pharmacy. Jinwan directly went in to buy medicine. Although her grandmother was not a good person and was clearly biased between her mother and her aunt, even if they could no longer contact each other in the future, she still had to buy these medicines. As for the rest, Jinwan did not plan to care. From buying medicine to buying all sorts of nutrition that the elderly needed, Jinwan finally stopped after filling the entire trunk. In the morning and afternoon, they only ate the food that Shenmue bought from outside. Furthermore, they didn't eat much. By the time they finished shopping, it was already 4:30 p.m. Shenmue parked the car in the parking lot near a shopping mall in G-City. He told them to eat first before going back. Anyway, he was only going to deliver some things. He didn't want his family to have dinner with him and asked them to stay. In fact, even if her aunt really wanted to use dinner as an excuse to make them stay, Jinwan would definitely not stay a minute longer in that home with Mo Jingshun. However, since they had already parked near the shopping mall, Jinwan glanced at the restaurants outside. None of them were big, so she chose the one that looked the cleanest. When she alighted from the car with Mo Jingshun, the two walked side by side. As they walked, Jinwan looked at the surroundings and said, "I really didn't expect that one day Great Boss Missouri would appear in a small city like this. You even have to find a place to eat near a wholesale mall." Mo Jingshun. How do I not look like an ordinary person? Do I have to specially find a gold-plated place to eat? That's not necessarily the case. But it's true that you don't fit in here. In fact, Jinwan did not want to laugh. However, when she saw the ordinary surroundings and the muddy weather, the air was filled with the stench of rotting vegetables from the nearby market, and the suit that Mo Jingshun was wearing, she felt that he must have rushed from Jing City to High City and then from High City to G City. He had been taking care of her and had not changed his clothes for at least 2 days. Although he was still incomparably handsome, it was rare that he did not look as noble and even more down-to-earth. When she spoke, she could not help but laugh. Seeing the woman glance at him, Mo Jingshun's handsome face remained expressionless. He reached over and held the woman in his arms, pressing her head against his chest, forcing her to press against the material of his shirt. He lowered his head and deliberately lowered his voice to say, "I haven't bathed for 2 days. You're very disgusted in? I don't dare to. I've stayed here for 3 days and haven't bathed. At most, I've wiped myself. Last night, I was drenched in the rain, and until now, I haven't even touched water. If we're going to be dirty, let's be dirty together. There's no need to be disgusted with each other." Jinwan wanted to push the man away, but unexpectedly, he held her tighter. Chapter 630. I heard that although G-City is small, it's close to mountains and rivers. A small city with mountains and rivers has its own benefits. There are quite a number of hot spring hotels. Although the decorations can't be compared to Jing City, it's more natural. The man's low chuckle was by her ears. Jinwan could even feel Mo Jingshun's hand gently rubbing against her back. From an outsider's perspective, the two of them were only whispering intimately. However, Jinwan could clearly feel the man's obvious hints. They had already left Jing City, yet he was still thinking about the hot spring hotel. It was not just a hint. Jinwan could clearly feel that the man could tell that her temper had softened today and was no longer going against him. He was taking the opportunity to tease her. She glared at him. However, even though the man was teasing her, as long as her gaze met his, she could see that his calm and deep eyes were filled with her reflection. It was as though all of the jokes and teasing had become incomparably harmonious in an instant. There was not the slightest bit of absurdity. She rolled her eyes at him and directly entered a restaurant in front. Seeing that this woman was unmoved by force or persuasion, Emo Jingshan sighed with a smile. It was just a simple little restaurant, but it was clean and there were quite a few people. After eating, the two of them were in no rush to return. After all, the weather was gloomy and there would be a storm soon. If they were to leave now, they would encounter a storm on the way back. It was better to wait for the storm to pass and ensure that there were no puddles on the road before leaving. After eating, the sky was still overcast, seeing that it would rain soon. Mo Jingshan calmly glanced at the sky and softly said, "Should we go back now or wait for the rain to pass?" Jinwan sat in the restaurant and looked at the weather outside. After thinking for a moment, she lazily said, "Let's go after the rain. The rain won't be light. However, there doesn't seem to be much to look at in G City. We don't know how long the rain will last. There aren't any attractions nearby. Why don't we find a cafe nearby to drink coffee to kill time?" Drink less coffee. Jinwan, these few years she had indeed drank a lot of coffee. However, Emo Jingshan clearly drank quite a lot as well. When she did not need to stay up late to work, she was indeed not addicted to coffee. However, she could not sit with Emo Jingshan in a crowded restaurant and face a few empty plates for the entire afternoon. "There's a shopping mall here. I'll accompany you." Jinwan, it was not easy for a man to take the initiative to accompany a woman to go shopping. It was obvious that this man wanted to please her. He probably couldn't think of anything more romantic in such a small place. Even the method was so practical. Jinwan was also a woman. Although she liked to buy things, she was not particularly keen on shopping, but at this moment, she suddenly wanted to go shopping. Jinwan glanced at him. "My card is frozen. You know it." Seeing that she was giving him a way out, the man took out his wallet and put it in front of her. "Don't you have mine?" Jinwan glanced at the black, high-quality leather wallet on the table. After a moment of silence, she said, "My fever only subsided this morning. I can't carry anything. Buy whatever you want, I'll carry the bags." Jinwan raised her brows, picked up the man's wallet, and directly put it into her bag. She stood up. "Oh, then I'll go shopping." His tone seemed to be very reluctant. Hearing this woman's deliberate tone, Emo Jingshan took another look at her. Jinwan's expression was calm. She turned and walked directly toward the shopping mall. The man looked at her and smiled slightly. Far away from High City and Jing City, where there were too many businesses, in this small town he had the rare time and patience to win his wife back. Jinwan took the man's wallet and walked directly into the shopping mall. She was wearing a pair of sports shoes that she had just changed into in the car. Her steps were light and fast, and her long hair was spread out behind her. As she walked, it danced with her movements. Coupled with her casual and comfortable clothes, she still looked like a young lady who was not even 20 years old. She was young and energetic, but not as flamboyant as she was many years ago. Under the faint restraint was a temperament that had been honed by life experience. The first floor of the shopping mall was mostly filled with cosmetics, jewelry, and watches. There were two shopping malls here. One was G City's wholesale mall, and there were all sorts of things. After entering, most of them were small trinkets that cost several tens of yuan. Even the clothes were not more than 100 yuan, but there were many different styles, and there were many people inside. Next to it was G City's department store. There were not many people, but the quality of the items here was much higher, and there were also some branded items. Jinwan, on the other hand, did not look down on any of them. After walking one round in the wholesale mall, she strolled around and looked at all kinds of trinkets. She touched this and that, and she liked them very much. After shopping for more than an hour, she finally went to the other department store. Mo Jingshin was probably too good-looking and had attracted the attention of someone in the mall. They tugged at him and asked if he wanted to find a job and if he wanted to be a male model. They said that if he wore branded men's clothing and stood on the first floor for a day, he could earn 300 yuan a day. Jinwon heard the movements behind her and quickly walked forward with a smile. She did not turn back. On the other hand, before the staff could finish their words, they were frozen by the man's cold and noble aura and did not dare to continue. However, they still muttered softly, 300 yuan a day. That's 9,000 yuan a month. You don't even care about such a high salary? Young people these days really don't care about money. However, the man did not even glance at the staff's work pass. He expressionlessly walked past. Jinwon had already walked to the side of a jewelry store and was trying on a cute little ring. This was a silver jewelry store. The items were not expensive, but the craftsmanship and design were all exquisite. The price was roughly a few hundred yuan. Mo Jingshin did not look at the price. He only saw Jinwon wearing the ring on her pinky finger. Does it look good? When Mo Jingshin walked over, Jinwon raised her hand and waved it at him. Jinwon's hand was very beautiful and suitable for wearing rings. However, she rarely wore jewelry on her body. The man glanced at it and only noticed one problem. Why is it on your pinky finger? Chapter 631. Jinwon. What the hell was this? She just wanted to try it on. She didn't say she wanted to buy it. Besides, even if she wanted to wear it on other fingers, it wouldn't fit. Jinwon was about to speak, but Mo Jingshin's hand had already firmly grasped hers. He took the ring off her little finger, gave her a very unkind look, and threw the ring back to the clerk behind the counter. Seeing the man's expression, Jinwon pursed her lips. Do you have other sizes? The man did not wait for her to speak and turned to ask the shop assistant. Yes. The shop assistant rushed to bring out several similar rings and place them on the counter one by one. The man picked up a ring that was exactly the same as the one Jinwon had just chosen and was about to put on her ring finger. However, Jinwon quickly withdrew her ring finger and glared at the man resolutely, indicating that she would not allow him to put it on her ring finger so casually. Mo Jingshin paused because of her obvious refusal. However, after thinking about it, although he was not sure about other fingers, the ring on her ring finger could not be worn so carelessly. He had to change it to a better occasion and ring. Thus, he did not insist. After checking the size, he was about to put it on her index finger when the shop assistant spoke up again with a half-joking tone. Sir, you can't put on your index finger either. Wearing a ring on your index finger implies that you are still single. If there are other men who want to pursue you, they can boldly pursue you. This is tantamount to announcing that you are single and welcoming others to pursue you. Are you trying to make yourself a cuckold? Mo Jingshin. Jinwon tried hard to hold back her laughter, but the faintly twitching flesh on her cheeks showed how hard it was for her to hold back her laughter. The shop assistant also noticed Jinwon's action of withdrawing her ring finger and said considerately, if you are passionately in love, you can wear it on your middle finger. This means that the flower is taken and you are passionately in love. Jinwon wanted to say who was passionately in love with him. It sounded like there was no problem for her to wear it on her little finger. It was quite good. Anyway, she did not have any plans to fall in love. However, this time the man did not stop. He expressionlessly picked up another ring of the same size and put it on Jinwon's middle finger. Jinwon looked at the ring on her middle finger. It was quite pretty. In fact, although silver jewelry was not expensive, the craftsmanship was relatively simple, so it was relatively easy to make all kinds of complicated designs. This was a style that many other jewelry, such as diamond, platinum, or platinum, could not make. But she really didn't say that she wanted to buy it. Not bad. After helping her put it on, Mo Jingshin held Jinwon's soft little hand in his, not intending to let go. At the same time, he appeared to be very satisfied. He said mildly, "It's very beautiful. Do you like it?" Jinwon, "I didn't plan to buy it. I just tried it on." The man acted as if he didn't hear her and turned to the shop assistant. "Do you have any other similar sizes?" "Yes." The shop assistant took out a few more items. They were all listed in front of Jean Wan, and she was dazzled. She felt that all of them were beautiful, but for some reason, she felt that the one she was wearing was the most beautiful. In fact, they were all similar, and the design style was outstanding. You don't like it? The man glanced at the ring on Jean Wan's finger. I like it, but there's no need. I'll take them all. I said there's no need to buy it. I didn't say. The man swept a glance and replied, I think you don't know which one to choose. Why don't you buy them all and wear them every day? Jean Wan, shop assistant. Several minutes later, the shop assistant handed over a bill. Sir, the 6 rings you've chosen cost a total of 1,590 yuan. Mo Jingshan's gaze faltered before landing on Jean Wan's face. Jean Wan once again held back her laughter. She suddenly realized that it was rare to see Boss Missouri in such a distressed state. A man like him might understand everything, but when it came to women's jewelry, he most likely didn't notice that this was a silver jewelry or other jewelry counter. He should have been prepared to spend millions or even tens of millions. Jean Wan raised her hand, waving the rings in front of his eyes. She smiled and said, This is a silver ring. Each one is only 200 to 300 yuan. When the man heard the price, he no longer showed any signs of surprise. He glanced at her again. Are you sure you like it? Jean Wan nodded. Since it wasn't expensive, she could just buy it. The blue diamond that was worth who knew how many billions was still in her hands, and the painting that was worth 600 million was gifted to her just like that. It was rare for her to go shopping, so there was nothing wrong with buying some small trinkets. Seeing that she really liked it, the man held her hand and turned to pay. In a small place like this, he could not casually wave his hand and put it under Boss Mo's name. Instead, he had to go to the cashier to pay in cash or by card. While the shop assistant waited by the counter, she carefully wrapped the rings and placed them into a jewelry bag. At the side, one of the shop assistants muttered softly, They actually bought so many silver rings. They're really simple and unadorned. The shop assistant, who had just sold the rings, calmly said, Don't be so superficial. Just look at that man and young lady's attire. Just a single cufflink from that man's suit would be enough to buy our entire shop. Don't rich people nowadays always say to return to their roots? Maybe it's because there are too many luxurious things, so he's interested in these little crafts on the street. Also, that young lady looks really good wearing it. She's prettier than many of the big diamond rings I've seen. That's true. That man doesn't look like an ordinary person. That young lady doesn't look ordinary either. Furthermore, that man kept asking that young lady if she really liked it. It was because she liked it that he bought it. Why would he care about the price? As long as the person he loves likes it, even jewelry worth hundreds of millions can't compare to a silver ring like this. After shopping for an hour in the department store, Jean Wan could no longer stand Mo Jingshan's attitude of helping her pack whatever she liked. In the end, she dragged him to the fresh supermarket on the basement level. Originally, Jean Wan was tugging on Mo Jingshan's sleeve as they walked. However, when they got off the elevator, Jean Wan suddenly realized that when did he become the one holding her hand? In a public place, Mo Jingshan, who had always been low-key and reserved, actually had a time when he was so persistent about certain things. For example, holding her hand. From a moment she tried on the ring, he naturally held her hand. Now, he naturally held her hand. He really acted as if it was only right and proper. Chapter 632. Not only did he hold her hand the entire time they stepped out of the elevator, he did not even intend to let go when Jean Wan went to pick some fruits. Mo Jingshan, I want to pick some fruits. Jean Wan turned to look at him, her tone filled with impatience. The man lowered his head to look at her hand in his. His tone was calm as he said, Which ones do you want? I'll help you pick. I can pick them myself. After buying a few more things, we can go back. I think the rain outside should have stopped by now. Let go of my hand. I'll do it myself. She tried to pull her hand away several times, but the man did not give her the chance. The uncles and aunties selling fruits all looked at them with ambiguous and envious gazes. In the end, Jean Wan was helpless. She picked some fruits with one hand and handed them to the man to carry. Thankfully, Shenmue came in time to help Mo Jingshin carry the rest of the car. Otherwise, no matter how strong Mo Jingshin was, it would not be realistic for him to carry so many things with one hand. Just like that, they were forced to hold hands and buy all sorts of things. As the two walked back to the elevator, Jinwan said, "Don't tell me you plan to hold my hand forever? How long do you think you can hold it for? A lifetime?" Mo Jingshin and Jinwan, shameless. Who would want to hold his hand forever? Don't think that just because he carried her out of her grandmother's house and sent her to the hospital in time to take care of her, she didn't fall out with him just because she was grateful to him. She really went with the flow and became his Mrs. Mo Impossible. Anyway, it was impossible. Absolutely impossible. Jinwan wanted to say this. However, when she tried to pull her hand away again in the elevator, the man held her firmly in his hand and did not let go. At the same time, his other hand held the fruits, vegetables, and fresh fish they bought with her. For some reason, she felt that the down-to-earth and homey boss Missouri was truly a breath of fresh air in the world of presidents. By the time they drove back to her grandmother's house, the storm had stopped. It had been raining for more than an hour. There was a small puddle on the ground, but it was not serious. Jinwan checked the weather forecast in the car and confirmed that there would not be any more rain today. After sending these things back to her grandmother, they could leave. When they returned to her grandmother's home, Shenmue helped carry the things in one by one. Mo Jingshin also carried a few things. However, although Jinwan dared to order Mo Jingshin around, Shenmue did not dare. Seeing his boss carrying the things so diligently without any complaints, he was so frightened that he rushed out and took the things in his hands, saying, "Though, Mo, rest. I'll do it, I'll do it." Her aunt sat in the yard, holding a fly swatter in one hand. She subconsciously swatted it back and forth on a wooden table. She watched as Jinwan and the others brought back all sorts of food, drinks, and medicine. It could be seen that they must have spent quite a lot on this trip. If they really didn't have a card to swipe, they wouldn't have bought so many things. But every time she wanted to ask for money, she raised her eyes to see the man called CEO Mo, the man who claimed to be Jinwan's husband. She hesitated and did not dare to speak up in the end. After Shenmue helped to carry everything in, Jinwan did not plan to stay here anymore. She planned to go in and bid farewell to her grandmother, who was lying on the bed, before leaving. Her grandmother looked at the piles of medicine and food by the bedside. She heard from the young man surnamed Shun that these were all bought by Jinwan. She also heard that Jinwan was going to leave. Her old face was thoughtful when she suddenly heard footsteps. She turned to see Jinwan walking in. "Grandmother, take good care of your body. If you eat these nourishing foods daily, they'll be enough for you for a year. They have a long shelf life, so you can eat them without worry. As for the medicine, they have a shelf life of 2 to 3 years. I bought a lot of them. It shouldn't be a problem for you to take them for 2 to 3 years." Jinwan stood by the bed and did not sit down. Her gaze was calm and indifferent. "I'll take all the things my mother left here with me. I won't have the chance to come back to G City in the future. Take care of yourself." After speaking, she did not look at her grandmother's expression and turned to leave. "Wait a minute, Jinwan." Her grandmother's gaze was stiff as she looked at the pile of things on the floor. Just as Jinwan was about to leave, she suddenly called out to her, "Child, wait a minute. I have something to tell you." Jinwan paused in her footsteps and turned back to look at her. Her grandmother's words were a little rushed. She coughed twice before leaning against the bed. She said weakly, "I won't be able to live for much longer. My body will live as long as I can. I originally wanted to call you back to tell you about your mother, but after seeing you return, I didn't know what to say. I know you don't have any feelings for your grandmother, but you do have a filial heart." Jinwan calmly looked at her. In fact, from the start, she had thought that she might be able to find out something by coming to G City. However, in the few days she had been back, apart from witnessing the weirdness of this family, she had gained nothing. But looking at her grandmother's expression, it seemed like she was finally going to get to the main topic. Jinwan sat in her grandmother's room for around 40 minutes and did not come out. Shenmue was slightly worried. He sat in the car and said, Miss G only went in to say goodbye. Why hasn't she come out yet? Mo Jingshin's gaze calmly shifted to the mother and daughter trio in the yard. This meant that Jean Wan was in her grandmother's room. There was only Jean Wan and the old woman who was paralyzed on the bed without anyone's help. It was clear that they were only chatting inside. Nothing else would happen. There's no rush. Wait patiently. The moment Mo Jingshin's words landed, Shenmu turned to look at the two sisters, Song Cici and Song Kiki, because they saw that Mo Jingshin did not plan to sit in their home and was waiting in the car outside the yard. The two sisters seemed to be thinking of something. They went in to change their clothes, put on makeup, and did their hair. They then stood in the yard, chatting and laughing, as though they were afraid that no one would be able to tell that they were purposely putting on a show for CEO Mo. However, the two sisters were hindered by Mo Jingshin's aura. Even if they wanted to, they did not have the guts to approach him. They could only stand in the yard and attempt to seduce him from afar. Their gazes would occasionally shift toward the car window. However, from the angle of the car window, they could not clearly see where Mo Jingshin was sitting in the car. Thus, their gazes kept shifting back and forth in the direction of the car windows. Yet, Mo Jingshin did not even glance at them. It was as though the yard was filled with filthy things. He could not even be bothered to lift his eyelids in that direction. Chapter 633. When Jinwan left her grandmother's room, Song Cici and Song Kiki were already tired from twisting and were resting in the courtyard. They turned to see Jinwan walking out. The two sisters raised their eyes to look at her, but Jinwan walked out without looking. Her face was expressionless, and it was impossible to tell what she was feeling. After Jinwan boarded the car and the high-end black car drove away, the mother and daughter trio sat in the courtyard with dejected expressions because they did not receive a single cent. Jinwan sat quietly in the car. She kept her eyes out of the window and did not speak. Mo Jingshin saw that she was troubled and did not speak. He gave her time to sort out her emotions. It was not until the car drove toward the main road of G City and moved further away from her so-called grandmother's house that the man's hand landed on the hand she had placed by her leg. He spoke. "You only came out after almost an hour. What did you talk about?" Jinwan paused and continued to look out the window. "She only spoke. She told me some things about my mother. I haven't figured out my own identity yet, but she threw me a difficult problem." "What problem?" "She said that my mother was not her biological mother. She said that when she was young, she worked for a rich family in Jing City and worked as a servant for a year. Later, she returned to the countryside and gave birth to my aunt. Because she lacked money, she went back to work for that family again. However, something happened to that family. It was similar to the melodramatic stories that only the older generation would have. Anyway, not long after my mother was born, she became an abandoned baby. My grandmother picked my mother up and raised her until she was 10 years old. When she sent her back, she wanted to take the opportunity to ask for some money. However, that family had already moved abroad and couldn't be contacted. At this point, Jinwan raised her hand to push back the hair hanging over her forehead and said mildly, "She adopted my mother so that she could ask for a few million yuan from that family when they wanted to find the child. However, her hopes were dashed. After that, she no longer had any thoughts about my mother and left her to fend for herself. After my mother graduated from junior high school, she borrowed money from her relatives for her high school education. Later, she worked to earn money and applied for a student loan. In the end, she received a scholarship to study abroad. Most of the money she earned was returned to those relatives. After that, she basically had no contact with my grandmother's family. However, after so many years, until my mother passed away, she still didn't know what happened to her own identity. She only thought that my grandmother didn't like her. Decades ago, there were indeed many wealthy families in China who preferred boys over girls. The man chuckled because she was still holding a grudge and pulled her to his side. Jinwan ignored him, closed her eyes, leaned against the seat, and was about to sleep. She refused to lean against him until the man raised his arm and took her in, pressing her head against his shoulder. Jinwan still wanted to struggle, but Mo Jingshun pressed her head down. Just lean against me. Don't move. Jinwan wanted to get up, but she was really sleepy. After thinking for a while, she didn't move anymore. She simply leaned against the man, closed her eyes, and said, I'll only lean against you for half an hour. Wake me up in half an hour. The man's low voice was accompanied by a smile. Okay. However, half an hour later, Jinwan was still sleeping on his shoulder. Of course, Mo Jingshun wouldn't wake her up. When the car passed a speed bump, he raised his hand to support Jinwan's head and held her in his arms, letting her lie in his arms. Chapter 634. When she returned to High City a few days ago, the people in the company didn't explain the situation. It was not until she came back that she learned that during her absence, High City's Sheng Group had been targeting Immerse Group. First, Jimengran Studio made a big move. She launched a land purchase plan with a 50% to 100% ratio. She put up several very good sites for sale and promoted them vigorously. Sheng Yihan directly invested a large sum of money in her, and there were advertisements everywhere. This move attracted the attention of most real estate developers, causing several plots of land under Immerse Group to be left unattended. However, in this case, Jinwan only needed to make a small concession in the price to attract the attention of her peers. After all, this year's real estate prices in High City were indeed the highest in the past 3 years. This opportunity must not be wasted. However, the Sheng Corporation had taken a risky move, and there were all kinds of people in the same industry who were causing trouble for her. As a result, Jimengran Studio's performance soared this month. Now, as long as it was related to Jimengran Studio, whether it was a brand or a partner, anyone with a discerning eye could see that if it continued to develop like this, there would be a second real estate studio in High City, and it would gradually establish its own company. Although this studio did not have the assistance of someone like Mr. Zand, it was still rooted in High City and had risen in High City. In addition, it had the backing of the Sheng Corporation. If it could obtain a large sum of financing, its performance and competitiveness in High City alone would be close to the current level of the MN Group. Although MN Group now enjoyed a certain reputation and value in the international Chinese community, it was, after all, moved back to China from London, and its roots in High City were not stable. If Jimengran deliberately wanted to compete with her through real estate, which was currently a high-income industry, there was really no telling what would happen in the future. Therefore, at this time, Jinwan stayed in the company and observed the movements of the real estate industry in High City every day. It had been a week since she left the company, nor did she return to the Ji family to deal with those personal affairs. And just a week after Jinwan returned to High City, the High City media suddenly exposed a piece of news online and in the major print media. The content of the news was all kinds of gossip about MN Group CEO, Jinwan, and the news title was even more eye-catching. Shock. Jinwan, ranked first on the Forbes list of Chinese female entrepreneurs, is actually the ex-wife of the owner of Shine Group. This news not only exposed the fact that Jinwan was once the #1 socialite of Hai Cheng's upper class, but it also exposed almost all of Jinwan's life. To the outside world, she was the daughter of the Ji family, the eldest daughter of the Ji family, but to the inside world, her biological father was unknown, and she was not related to the Ji family at all. It was just that the Ji family had never disclosed Jinwan's identity to the public due to their pride. There was also the marriage between the Ji and Mo families several years ago. Back then, Jinwan had married into the Mo family and became Mo Jingshun's wife. However, 3 years ago, she divorced and went abroad for unknown reasons. Although the eye-catching content was about Jinwan and Mo Jingshun's marriage, the actual content only mentioned this matter briefly and more about Jinwan's personal situation. For example, why Mo Jingshun divorced Jinwan before he went to the United States to take over Shine. For example, when Jinwan went to England, she left with Mr. Zand, who was famous in the foreign business circle. For example, when Jinwan established the company in London, she hugged, smiled, held hands, and even kissed everyone she met in various social venues and social circles. In fact, These were very polite behaviors in Western communication, but from the angle of the photos, it seemed that she took the initiative to stick to those people, take the initiative to hug or flirt with them. The exposé was full of sarcasm about Jean Wan's road to success, saying that she had climbed into the beds of countless men in the past few years and had flirted with countless men in social events and at the wine table. That was how she had managed to get all the investment she had. And in every tender and new project negotiation, she had used all kinds of shady methods to seize the initiative with her partners. More importantly, among the more than 20 photos, only 4 or 5 had Jean Wan's face. Most of them were accidentally taken by the media at some social events and banquets, and the angles of the photos were indeed misleading. However, the rest of the photos were mostly of her back and profile, but those back and profile looked very similar to Jean Wan. Combined with those photos with her face, it was more certain that the person in those photos must be Jean Wan. However, in those photos with only her profile and back, the woman in the photos was dressed in revealing clothes, being hugged and kissed by men in those ambiguous places, or sitting on a man's lap, the straps of her long dress slipping down, looking as if she was about to be undressed in public without the slightest sense of shame. Her face couldn't be seen clearly in those photos, but they looked very similar to Jean Wan's profile. Jean Wan, once the #1 socialite in High City, was successfully labeled as the #1 social butterfly, and all her achievements in the past few years were forcibly exaggerated by sex deals. For a time, all the companies that had cooperated with MN Group were in an uproar. Phone calls came one after another, and many wives of male partners suspected that their husbands had an affair with Jean Wan, the social butterfly, and scolded her on the internet. MN Group was also in a mess. On the one hand, the phone of the public relations department was almost blown up, and, on the other hand, the company was besieged by the media and curious onlookers. Even on the day of the company's regular meeting, the media rushed in and waited at the door of the meeting room, but Jean Wan herself didn't appear. The company was besieged, and people from all walks of life condemned Jean Wan, and slogans such as asking MN Group to get out of High City and go back to London were posted all over the major print media and the internet. Jean Wan was at home in Uehu Bay. She returned home from the company as soon as the messy news broke out, but she didn't tell anyone, and many employees in the company didn't know where she was now. Since the news broke out, Jean Wan shut herself at home, isolated from the world, sitting on the balcony, looking at Uehu Lake downstairs, and quietly drinking milk. No one knew why Jean Wan had been particularly quiet these days. After all, it was not in line with her character, but maybe those photos and the news were all true. Maybe she was too ashamed to come out and explain, and she couldn't explain at all. Chapter 635. Many people were surprised that Jean Wan used to be Mo Jingshan's wife. They didn't expect that such a man as a Prince Charming would have such a black mark in his marriage. How could he have been married to Jean Wan? But fortunately, they had divorced. Fortunately, Mo Jingshan was still Mo Jingshan and no longer had anything to do with Jean Wan, a socialite who polluted the business circle. Nowadays, the online media was becoming more and more developed, and news and scandals were wantonly publicized. In 2 days, it had spread all over the country. After all, people were tired of all kinds of news and entertainment circle, but gossip and scandals among the rich were very fresh. Not to mention that it was about the Mo family and the G family in High City. Besides, Jean Wan's MN Group had entered the public's attention like a dark horse since the beginning of the year. Many people were optimistic about MN Group, but of course, there was no lack of secretly envious and malicious people. The higher one stood, the more attention he would receive once he fell into the water. There were many scandals about the upper class and the rich in recent years, but this time, Jean Wan suffered a heavy blow. It could be said that overnight, she was abused and looked down upon by the whole internet, and all kinds of articles about how bitchy Jean Wan was spread wildly in the major media. At night, in the CEO's office of the High City division of Shine Group, Xiao Lui pushed the door open, threw the newspapers and magazines in his hands on Mo Jingshan's desk, and looked deeply at the man behind the desk who looked indifferent and calm. It's been 2 days since the incident happened. Our Xiao family couldn't reach out to the Ji family, and Ji Hongwen also refused to help Jin Wan. I thought you must have been trying to help her these days, but I didn't expect that you didn't do anything at all. Seeing Xiao Lui's murderous look, Mo Jingshan's face was calm. Take care of yourself first. When it comes to the Ji family, the Xiao family is really not qualified to help. Xiao Lui's face darkened. If you still don't want to show up, the Xiao family won't sit still. My father has been anxiously looking for Jin Wan these days. He can't eat or sleep well, but she turns off her phone and hides all her contact information. If this continues, who knows what will happen. Those photos of Jin Wan's front were obviously taken at a wrong angle, but those side photos were all taken by Ji Mangran. She and Jin Wan share the same mother, but have different fathers, but her figure and profile look similar. As long as she deliberately put on makeup, she would look more like Jin Wan. She asked people to take photos in all kinds of brothels and now expose them. She must have planned this for a long time. Even if we know she has been plotting this for a long time, what can we do with just a few words of explanation except to support Jin Wan? Can the dirty water that splashed on her be washed clean? Mo Jingshan flipped through the documents without raising his head, calmly saying, even she isn't anxious. Why are you anxious? How do you know she's not anxious? Xiao Lui glanced at him coldly. As far as I know, she hasn't contacted anyone in the past 2 days, has she? Mo Jingshan didn't comment. That little woman locked herself in her home in Yuehu Bay, didn't go out at all, and didn't see anyone. She just sat on a balcony all day in a daze. After the accident, she didn't ask anyone for help. She even knew that he could help her when she was being scolded. He could help her block a lot of unnecessary scolding and even help her solve the problem. But she would rather turn off her phone and sit at home without seeing anyone than give him a call. If he hadn't arranged a live-in nanny upstairs so that he could see what was going on her balcony at any time, even he wouldn't know what was going on with Jin Wan. However, the fact was that when everyone thought Jin Wan was too ashamed to see anyone, and some even suspected that Jin Wan would secretly find a place to commit suicide out of shame, Jin Wan was sitting on a balcony drinking milk and watching the scenery. Obviously, if she could find a way to solve the problem in time, she wouldn't have dragged it on for so long. Dragging it until now could only mean that she couldn't explain herself because of those photos, and she couldn't come up with a good solution even after locking herself up for 2 days. But even at this point, she was still very tough and didn't say a word. Mo Jingshan didn't even need her to beg him at all. Even if she just sent him a WeChat message to let him know that she needed him, all the problems could be solved, but she still kept quiet. Xiao Lui had always been calm, but after 2 days, he didn't hear a word from Mo Jingshan, so he came here to see if he was going to chase Jin Wan back. But now he saw Mo Jingshan was calm and indifferent, and from his understanding of men, he could tell what he was waiting for. Ji Mangran seems to have made a big move this time. It seems that she has made a big move. She confronted Jin Wan head-on in the business circle and suppressed Jin Wan with public opinion. She must hate Jin Wan's company, so she's trying to give her a fatal blow. Xiao Lui glanced at the news that popped up on his cell phone from time to time. In the past 2 days, all the major gossip news had been dominated by Jin Wan's name. He casually threw his cell phone onto the coffee table in the office, took out a cigarette, lit it, and put it in his mouth, narrowed his eyes, and said, "If you don't do something, it's really hard to chase my sister." One of them smoked, and the other read documents. Although they were in the same office, they tacitly kept silent. Occasionally, various news about Jin Wan's gossip history popped up on their cell phones at the same time, and the media kept scolding Jin Wan. Even the hot searches about Inmin Group and Jin Wan on Weibo, which had gradually come into the public's attention in the past 2 years, crushed countless stars in the entertainment circle for 2 days in a row. Xiao Lui didn't sit long and left. Late at night, Mo Jingshan moved his eyes away from the documents in his hand and looked at the computer screen that had been on all the time. The hot news list of the major media was closely following Jin Wan's ranking. It was the news that Ji Mingran Studio had just signed a 300 million yuan land purchase agreement, and more detailed information about Ji Mingran was exposed in the media. It was said that Ji Mingran was the real Missy of the G Corporation, that Ji Mingran was qualified to inherit the G Corporation, and that Ji Mingran was very business-minded and was comparable to Jin Wan. Mo Jingshan watched as the topic of comparing Jin Wan and Ji Mingran's popularity continued to rise. His brows moved slightly as he smiled coldly. So that's what you're planning. Dash. Chapter 636. Mo Jingshan picked up the phone, dialed a number, and made a simple arrangement. Find a media person who is pushing the topic of Ji Mingran. There's no need to suppress her. Just let her do it. Then, the man sat quietly at his desk, watching the news on the computer slowly changing. The next day, Shenmu knocked on the door and entered. CEO Mo, I found a media company and a photographer who worked with Ji Mingran. These are all the original photos in their camera. Mo Jingshan glanced at him, and Shenmu quickly came up and handed him the USB flash drive, saying, The original photos are in here. The person has been taken away by the police for investigation. I've seen those photos. There are more than 100 of them from all angles. They haven't been deleted or processed. The ones that have been exposed in the media are the ones that look the most like Miss G from the back and side of the photos. Take a look. The USB flash drive is very interesting. There are even videos. Aside from some unsteady front photos, Ji Mingran's face can also be seen in those videos. Shenmu knew the reason why Mo Jingshan didn't show up for the past 2 days. It was because Jin Wan's current situation was not good enough to protect her. Even if he did, he wouldn't be able to wash away the dirty water on her. What he needed to do was to protect Jin Wan. While protecting her, he had to boil all the dirty water that had been splashed on her before pouring it back on her. Moreover, before there was evidence, it was not a good time for Mo Jingshan to show up for the past 2 days. Seeing that CEO Mo was already looking at the photos, Shenmu didn't speak anymore. He turned to leave the office and picked up his phone to check the news, only to find that all kinds of news about Ji Mingran had suddenly become the hottest topic. Shenmu took a look and smiled. Sure enough, as long as CEO Mo was in control of this matter, it wouldn't be easy for anyone to climb up by stepping on Jin Wan. Jin Wan didn't watch the news tonight. Anyway, it was all about the same things. The incident had been brewing for 2 days. Her initial anger had now become numb. She took out the last dish that she had just cooked and placed it on the dining table. Xiaotan, who was constantly looking at her mobile phone at the table, glanced at the 3 dishes and 1 soup on the table and couldn't help but say, At this time, you still have the patience to cook. I said that I came to accompany you and see how you are. It's fine if you don't eat at night, but you insisted on cooking and made such a sumptuous meal. If I didn't know better, I would think that you have something to celebrate. Although she said that, Xiao Tian's hand still picked up the chopsticks and put a piece of meat into her mouth. She smacked her lips a few times and couldn't help but say, After you came back, I was pregnant until I gave birth. I didn't have time to accompany you alone. I didn't realize that your cooking skills are so good now. The more you do, the better it will be. Do you cook a lot now? The company is so busy. How can I have time to cook for myself? A few years ago, I could only order takeout from the company. When I was in England, during the most difficult year, I almost cooked every day. She used to cook very well, but now the taste of her cooking was definitely better than that of 3 years ago. After taking a bite, Xiao Tian couldn't help but pick other dishes. Then she got up, ran to the kitchen to get a bowl, and came out to drink the soup. In the end, most of the dishes on the table were eaten by Xiao Tian. Jinhua didn't eat much, but she was full. Xiao Tian was so full that she had to get up and walk back and forth in her room. When she walked to the balcony and looked down at the moon lake below, she sighed. Fortunately, you moved your home to Yuehu Bay early, and there are not many people who know where you live. The security here is better, and those reporters can't break in. I've been worried about you, but it seems that you're in a good mood, and from what Jin Wan said just now, she could tell that cooking was also a way to vent her emotions. But her calmness was still unsettling. After all, the scolding outside was really unbearable. Xiao Tian had wanted to contact the media directly and explain for Jin Wan, but she was afraid that she would cause trouble if she acted rashly, so she came to see her first. Otherwise, will I commit suicide because of depression? Jinwon put away the dishes and replied as she walked out of the kitchen. Not really. It's just some gossip. If you commit suicide because of this scandal, all the female stars in the entertainment circle who are slandered every day will be dead. Xiao Tian leaned against the floor-to-ceiling window on her balcony and looked at Jinwon, who came to clean up the house. You live here by yourself now. Didn't you hire an aunt to help you? I hired an aunt to come and clean the house every 2 days, but I didn't let her come these 2 days. I want to be alone. Xiao Tian looked at her. What's there to be alone? Ji Minggran has clearly prepared for this. Just now, I saw the news and found that the topic about her studio suddenly overshadowed your popularity, and the news about which one of you is qualified to inherit the G Corporation has also spread. She has been thinking about these things for a long time. Jinwon went to pour a glass of water, then held the glass and drank the warm water in it, saying, her hatred for me is much more than what you see and know. But this time, she did plan it for a long time. The photos I was taken at the social events in London were all illustrations and some business news of the official media. That's all she could collect. She found some photos that looked ambiguous, enlarged them, and then released all kinds of photos that she deliberately took to confuse the public. Then can't you say that you and Ji Minggran's back and profile are similar? Jinwon chuckled. What's the use of saying it? In this kind of entertainment society, many people will only believe what they want to believe. Even if I explain now and say that the person in those photos is not me, not many people will believe me. Even if I say a bunch of reasons, it will be the same. They will only believe what they see. What's more, the scandals and the rich and powerful can satisfy the mood of many people. If I could wash my name clean with just a few words, will I still need to lock myself up at home for 2 whole days? Xiao Tian was silent for a moment and then said, but now you have a chance to defend yourself. The 2 hot topics about Ji Minggran have become the first and second, and the topic about you has become the third, which proves that her purpose is not pure. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.